I stood at the airline counter staring at the agent who just told me my first-class ticket to the Caribbean had been canceled. My family was already on the plane. Before I could process the betrayal, my phone buzzed with a message from my sister. "Thanks for the upgrade," it read. "Take the kids home. We need a child-free reset." I turned around to find my 6-year-old niece and nephew huddled by a trash can, crying and completely alone in one of the busiest airports in the world. She had abandoned them. What she did not know was that abandoning them with me would be the most expensive mistake she ever made. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who thought they could walk all over you. My name is Amanda, 34 years old, and for my entire adult life, I was the designated family ATM. Growing up, I was the quiet, responsible one, while my older sister Caroline was the golden child who could do no wrong. Our parents, Patricia and Richard, worshipped the ground she walked on, constantly making excuses for her reckless behavior while expecting me to foot the bill. They thought I just had a little work-from-home job that barely paid the bills. What they did not know was that I was the chief operating officer of a major tech firm and a covert real estate investor. I kept my wealth entirely to myself because I knew exactly what my family would do if they found out. That Tuesday morning at JFK Terminal 4 was supposed to be the start of a luxury family vacation to St. Bart's. I had paid for everything: 5 premium tickets, a sprawling oceanfront villa, and all the excursions. It was my gift to my parents and my sister, a desperate, foolish attempt to finally buy a peaceful family memory. But as I handed my passport to the Delta ticketing agent, her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and a confused frown settled on her face. "I am sorry, ma'am, but you do not have a reservation on this flight," the agent said, her eyes darting from her screen to my face. "That is impossible," I replied, fighting the urge to check my own printed itinerary. I booked 5 tickets under my name: Amanda, Patricia, Richard, Caroline, and 2 children, Leo and Mia. The agent typed frantically for another moment before looking up with a sympathetic sigh. "I see the original booking, but your specific seat was canceled at 3 in the morning. The credit from your first-class ticket was applied to an upgrade for a newly added passenger named Brad. The rest of your party boarded 20 minutes ago." My blood ran cold. Brad was Caroline's newest boyfriend, a lazy grifter she had known for barely 3 months. She had secretly logged into my airline account, canceled the ticket I paid for, and swapped me out for a man who did not even have a job. But the sheer audacity of stealing my ticket was nothing compared to the horrific realization that hit me next. The agent said my parents, Caroline and Brad, had boarded. She did not mention the twins. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs as I scanned the chaotic sea of travelers in Terminal 4. Hundreds of people were rushing past with luggage, checking monitors, and shouting into cell phones. Panic gripped my throat. Where were Leo and Mia? Then I saw them. 2 tiny figures sitting on the cold tile floor right next to an overflowing trash can near the security checkpoint. They were clutching their small superhero backpacks, their faces red and streaked with tears. They were completely unguarded, looking terrified as strangers rushed past them. My 6-year-old niece and nephew had been left behind in an international airport. As I sprinted towards them, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a text message from Caroline. I stopped dead in my tracks to read the words that would forever sever my ties to my sister. "Hey, I swapped your ticket to upgrade Brad. You are single with a little work-from-home job, so take the twins back to your place. Brad and I need a child-free reset. Have fun." Attached to the message was a photo. It showed Caroline and Brad sitting in the spacious first-class cabin, grinning widely and clinking crystal flutes of champagne. She looked absolutely radiant, completely untroubled by the fact that she had just committed felony child abandonment. She used my money to fund a romantic getaway with her flavor of the month and discarded her own children like heavy luggage. I shoved my phone into my pocket and dropped to my knees in front of the twins. "Leo, Mia," I said gently, reaching out to hug them. "It is okay. Aunt Amanda is here." Instead of reaching back, Leo flinched. He shrank away from my hand, his small body trembling violently. Mia hid her face behind her brother's shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. "Sweetheart, why are you crying so hard?" I asked, keeping my voice low and soothing. I am not mad at you. We are going to get out of here. Leo looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, his lower lip quivering. Mommy said we could not come on the airplane, he whimpered. She said we had to sit right here and wait for you. But she said if we cried, you would be really angry. Mia peeked out from behind him, her voice barely a whisper. Mommy said you hate kids. She said if we made a sound, you would lock us in your dark basement forever. A wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over me. Caroline had not just dumped her children at an airport to go party in the Caribbean. She had deliberately terrorized them. She weaponized their fear, feeding them horrific lies about me, so they would sit quietly by a trash can and not make a scene while she slipped through security with her boyfriend. She manipulated her own babies into silent compliance, knowing they would be too paralyzed by fear to cry for help. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain visibly calm for their sake. That is not true, I said softly, holding out my hands, palms up so they could see I was not a threat. Mommy made a bad joke. I do not even have a basement. I have a whole freezer full of ice cream and a giant television. You are completely safe with me. Before I could say another word, a heavy shadow fell over us. I looked up to see two armed airport security officers standing directly above me. Their expressions were stern, their eyes darting from the crying children to my face. One of the officers rested his hand firmly on his radio, leaning in with a voice that demanded immediate answers. Ma'am, we have been watching these children sit here alone for the past 30 minutes. Step away from them and present your identification right now. I stood up slowly, keeping my hands visible, and pulled my driver's license from my wallet. I handed it to the taller officer, a broad-shouldered man whose name tag read Miller. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my voice to remain perfectly steady. I am their aunt, I said, pointing to Leo and Mia, who were now clinging to my pant legs. My sister, their mother, just abandoned them here to board a flight to the Caribbean. Officer Miller scrutinized my ID and then looked down at the terrified twins. His partner, a female officer with sharp, observant eyes, pulled out a notepad. Ma'am, you do not have a boarding pass, she stated firmly. We cannot just let you walk out of an international airport with two minors without verifying custody. If we cannot reach the legal guardians to confirm you have permission to take them, protocol requires us to contact Child Protective Services. The words Child Protective Services sent a jolt of ice straight through my veins. The thought of Leo and Mia being handed over to strangers and placed in the system because of Caroline's selfishness was unthinkable. I cannot let you call CPS, I said, pulling out my phone. I have proof. I have the text message she just sent me. I shoved the phone toward Officer Miller. He read Caroline's text about needing a child-free reset and stared at the selfie of her and Brad drinking champagne. The officer's jaw tightened. The disgust flashing across his face was unmistakable. This is highly irregular, he said, handing the phone back. I still need verbal confirmation from a legal guardian, or I have to make the call. Get her on the phone right now. I dialed Caroline's number, but it went straight to voicemail. She had already turned her phone to airplane mode to enjoy her complimentary pre-flight drinks. Gritting my teeth, I dialed the only other people on that flight who could stop this nightmare. My parents. Patricia and Richard were sitting in the row right behind Caroline. They had to know what was happening. The phone rang 3 times before my mother answered. Her voice was an irritated, hushed whisper. Amanda, what on earth is your problem? Patricia hissed. People are trying to settle into their seats and your constant calling is embarrassing us. Mom Caroline just dumped Leo and Mia at the security checkpoint. I shot back, gripping the phone so hard. My knuckles turned white. She abandoned them by a trash can and boarded your flight with Brad. The airport police are standing right next to me, and they are threatening to call CPS. I need you to hand the phone to Caroline so she can give the police verbal consent for me to take the kids home. Instead of gasping in horror, instead of screaming at Caroline for leaving her grandchildren alone in a sprawling airport, my mother let out a long, exasperated sigh. Stop making a scene, Amanda. Patricia scolded, her tone dripping with venom. Caroline is sitting right in front of me and she is exhausted. She just went through a very tough divorce. She deserves a luxurious break. Just take the kids back to your little apartment and stop ruining our vacation. I stared at the officers in front of me, completely stunned by the sheer delusion radiating through the speaker. "You are defending her," I demanded, my voice rising. "She committed child abandonment. The police are about to take your grandchildren into state custody. You are the one traumatizing them by making a big deal out of this," Patricia snapped back. "You work from home on your laptop all day. You have nothing but free time. You have always been jealous of your sister because she attracts successful men and you cannot even get a date. Just be a supportive aunt for once in your life. Family is about sacrifice." Before I could unleash the fury boiling inside me, the phone fumbled on the other end. My father, Richard, had snatched the device from my mother. His booming, authoritative voice filled my ear, immediately shifting to the aggressive manipulation he had used to control me since childhood. "Listen to me very carefully, Amanda," Richard growled. "You refused to pay for Caroline's tuition last month when we asked you to. You humiliated her by making her ask for a loan. The absolute least you can do is watch your own niece and nephew for a week. Consider babysitting your rent for simply existing in this family." "Dad, the police need verbal consent," I pleaded, trying to appeal to whatever tiny shred of logic he had left. "Tell her to talk to the officers." "Do not you dare hand that phone to a cop and embarrass this family," Richard barked. "If you call the authorities and ruin this trip, I will personally ensure you are cut out of this family forever. You figure it out. Do your job for once." The line went dead. I stood frozen in the middle of Terminal 4, the dial tone ringing in my ear. They knew. They watched Caroline walk onto that plane without her children, and they actively defended her. They saw me not as a daughter, but as an unpaid, emotionless servant designed solely to clean up Caroline's messes. Officer Miller crossed his arms, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, was that the mother? We need to speak with her immediately." "She hung up," I admitted, my voice trembling with a mixture of shame and boiling rage. "They refused to speak to you." The female officer shook her head, pulling a radio from her belt. "I am sorry, but without legal authorization, we cannot release these minors to you. You could be anyone. You could be a flight risk. I am dispatching a social worker now." "No, please wait," I begged, dropping to my knees again to pull Leo and Mia closer to my chest. The twins began to wail, terrified by the uniforms and the loud noises of the terminal. "There has to be another way. I can show you photos of us together. I can show you my bank statements proving I buy their groceries." "It is not about groceries," the officer said firmly. "It is about the law. You are not their legal guardian." The words hit me like a freight train. Legal guardian. Caroline had sole custody on paper, but there was one other person who still shared parental rights. A man my family had spent the last 6 months aggressively destroying in family court. A man Caroline had banned from the house, poisoned the children against, and falsely accused of being a danger, just so she could move her new boyfriend in without interference. I pulled my phone back out, my fingers flying across the screen as I searched for a number I had been forbidden to call. My parents had sworn they would disown me if I ever spoke to him again. They claimed he was unstable and dangerous. But looking at the 2 terrified children clinging to my jacket, I knew the real danger was the woman currently sipping champagne at 30,000 feet. I bypassed my family group chat and scrolled down to the blocked contacts list. I unblocked the number, took a deep breath, and hit dial. I was calling Devin, the twins' biological father. The phone rang twice before a deep, cautious voice answered. "Hello, Devin, it is Amanda." A heavy pause followed. "Amanda, I am not supposed to be talking to you. Caroline's lawyer made that very clear." "Devin, listen to me," I interrupted, my voice trembling with urgency. "Caroline left Leo and Mia at JFK Terminal 4. She abandoned them to go to the Caribbean with a guy named Brad. The airport police are here and they are threatening to call Child Protective Services. You need to get here right now." The silence shattered. "I am 30 minutes away," Devin said, his voice dropping an octave, completely stripping away his usual composed demeanor. "Do not let anyone take my kids." The wait was excruciating. Officer Miller and his partner stood a few feet away, their eyes darting between me and the twins. Leo and Mia sat pressed against my legs, exhausted and confused. Finally, the automatic doors slid open and Devin sprinted into the terminal. He was wearing his hospital scrubs, having clearly run straight out of his pediatric clinic the second we hung up the phone. "Daddy," Leo screamed, breaking away from me. Mia followed right behind him. Devin dropped to his knees on the hard airport floor, sliding across the tile to catch them both in his arms. He buried his face in their small shoulders, his broad frame shaking with heavy, unrestrained sobs. It was the most raw, heartbreaking display of love I had ever witnessed, a stark contrast to the cold indifference my own parents had just shown on their flight. I stepped closer, giving them a moment, but the reality of the situation hung heavily over us. "Devin," I said softly, "why haven't you seen them? Caroline told our family you abandoned them. She said you wanted nothing to do with the kids and that you walked out." Devin looked up, his face stained with tears, his eyes hardening with a mix of deep sorrow and intense rage. "She told you I abandoned them." He stood up, keeping one hand securely on each child. "Amanda, I have spent the last 6 months fighting for my life in family court. Caroline filed a temporary restraining order against me. She completely fabricated a domestic disturbance call to get me kicked out of our house." I stared at him, sickened. "A restraining order, but you never even raised your voice to her." "She knew exactly what she was doing," Devin said, his voice low and tight. "I am a black man in America. When a wealthy white woman calls the police and claims she feels threatened, the system does not ask for proof right away. They ask questions later. If I had fought her at the door, if I had raised my voice or argued with the responding officers, they would have arrested me on the spot. I could have lost my medical license, my pediatric practice, absolutely everything I worked for. So I left, exactly like my lawyer told me to do." He wiped a tear from his cheek, looking down at his children. "She bled my bank accounts dry fighting ghost allegations in family court. She weaponized the legal system to keep me away from my own children so she could move her new boyfriend into the house without me interfering. And your parents paid for her lawyer. They funded her entire campaign to destroy me." My stomach churned. The penthouse she lived in, the luxury lifestyle she flaunted, the victim narrative she sold to our parents. It was all a meticulously crafted lie built on the destruction of a good man. My parents had eaten it up because it fit perfectly with their blind devotion to their golden child. "But why didn't you check on them today?" I asked, still trying to piece the twisted puzzle together. "If you knew she was erratic, why let her take them on vacation?" Devin reached into his scrub pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking as he opened his email app and shoved the screen toward me. "Because she told me they were with you." I took the phone. The email was sent from Caroline's account at 11 o'clock last night. "Devin, Amanda is taking the twins to a remote cabin upstate for the next 2 weeks. There is absolutely no cell service or internet out there, so do not bother trying to check in. I am taking a solo trip to clear my head. Do not contact me either." I felt the blood drain from my face. Caroline had not just acted on a whim. She had premeditated this entire sick game. She used me as a legal shield, a fake alibi to keep Devin from triggering an Amber Alert or calling the police while she slipped out of the country to sip champagne with a deadbeat. She set it up perfectly so that no one would be looking for Leo and Mia while they sat shivering next to a trash can in Terminal 4. She thought she had covered all her bases. Before I could say another word to Devin, the sharp crackle of a police radio broke the tension. Officer Miller was marching back toward us, and his demeanor had shifted from impatient to openly hostile. His hand was resting heavily on his utility belt, right above his handcuffs. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes locked onto Devin. "Sir, I ran the identification you provided the security desk on your way into the terminal." Devin stood up straight, his protective instincts instantly kicking in as he pulled Leo and Mia slightly behind his legs. "Yes, officer. I am their biological father." Officer Miller shook his head, his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. "The system shows an active standing restraining order against you filed by the mother of these children. It strictly prohibits you from being within 100 feet of the minors." "Officer, please, you do not understand." Devin started holding his hands up in a peaceful, placating gesture. "I understand exactly what the computer tells me." Officer Miller interrupted, his voice echoing loudly across the terminal, drawing the stares of passing travelers. "Step away from the children, immediately place your hands behind your back and turn around. You are in violation of a court order." The twins began to scream, terrified by the shouting and the sudden aggression directed at their father. Devin froze, panic washing over his face as the nightmare of the legal system closed its jaws around him once again, right in front of his babies. I stepped directly between Officer Miller and Devin, planting my feet firmly on the polished airport tile. "Do not touch him," I commanded, my voice cutting through the noise of the terminal with a sharp, undeniable authority. I raised my hands, holding my phone out like a shield. "You are looking at the wrong criminal officer." Officer Miller's hand remained on his cuffs, his eyes narrowing. "Ma'am, step aside. There is a court order in the system. I have a job to do. And your job is to protect these children." I fired back, not moving an inch. "Look at this screen. Read the timestamp." I shoved the phone closer to his face. He hesitated, but his eyes darted down to the message Caroline had sent me. He read the text where she explicitly stated she was leaving the twins with me to enjoy a child-free reset. He looked at the selfie of her and Brad drinking champagne in first class. "Now read this," I demanded, swiping to the email Devin had forwarded to me just moments ago. She sent this to their father last night, telling him I was taking the kids to a remote cabin with no cell service. She deliberately lied to him so he would not call the police for a wellness check. She premeditated this entire situation. My sister just crossed international borders and left two 6-year-old children completely unattended in a public airport. That is felony child abandonment. The female officer stepped up beside her partner, leaning in to read the emails and text messages for herself. She let out a heavy breath and looked up at Officer Miller, giving him a subtle, knowing nod. The aggressive tension radiating from Miller slowly began to dissipate. He took a step back, his hand finally dropping away from his utility belt. Devin was still on his knees, shielding Leo and Mia with his own body, his breathing heavy and ragged. He looked up at the officers, waiting for the devastating blow of the legal system that had already failed him once. Officer Miller pulled a small notepad from his chest pocket. "Sir, you can stand up," he said, his tone entirely transformed. It was no longer the voice of a cop addressing a suspect. It was the voice of a public servant addressing a victim. "Based on the digital evidence provided, your ex-wife has committed a severe criminal offense. The temporary restraining order she filed was clearly weaponized to facilitate this abandonment. I am not going to arrest you today." Devin let out a choked gasp of relief, burying his face in Leo's hair. I felt my own knees threaten to buckle, but I forced myself to stay standing. We needed to keep moving. "I am generating an official incident report for child abandonment and child endangerment right now," Officer Miller continued, tearing a slip of paper from his notepad and handing it to Devin. "Take this incident number. Call your family lawyer the second you leave this airport. You need to file for an emergency ex parte custody order immediately. When the judge sees this police report, that restraining order will be dissolved and she will lose all parental rights." "Thank you," Devin whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he took the paper. "Thank you so much." We gathered the twins and their small backpacks. The adrenaline that had been keeping me upright was beginning to wear off, replaced by a cold, calculated determination. We walked out of Terminal 4 and headed straight for the parking garage. The New York air was brisk, but it felt amazing after the suffocating panic of the airport. Devin strapped Leo and Mia into their car seats in the back of his SUV. They were so exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the morning that they both fell asleep almost instantly. Devin gently closed the car door and leaned against the vehicle, running a trembling hand over his face. "Amanda, I do not even know what to say," he murmured, looking at me with bloodshot eyes. "You saved my life back there. If they had arrested me, my medical practice would have been suspended. She would have destroyed everything." "She has already destroyed enough," I replied, crossing my arms against the chill. "Devin, I am so sorry. I am sorry for my parents. I am sorry for the racist, manipulative game they played to help Caroline take your kids away. I always knew they favored her, but I never realized they were capable of funding something this evil." Devin sighed heavily, staring down at the concrete. "Your parents paid for the most vicious family law firm in the city. Caroline's lawyer is an absolute shark. I spent my entire savings account just fighting the fake domestic disturbance charge. I am tapped out, Amanda. I do not even know how I am going to afford the retainer to file this emergency custody order tomorrow." "You do not have to worry about that," I said firmly, meeting his eyes. I am going to pay for it. Devin looked at me, confusion washing over his face. Amanda, emergency retainers for this kind of high-profile custody battle can be upwards of $30,000. You work a remote customer service job. I cannot ask you to drain your little savings for this. A grim smile touched my lips. My family really loves the narrative they created for me, do not they? They love telling people I am just a single girl tapping away on a laptop in my pajamas. Devin frowned. Are you not? I am the chief operating officer of a global tech firm, Devin. I manage multi-million-dollar accounts every single day. I have an entire portfolio of real estate investments under a private LLC. I let my family believe I am broke because I knew if they found out I had money, they would bleed me dry to fund Caroline's lifestyle. I stepped closer to him. We are going to hire the most ruthless, expensive family law attorney in New York. We are going to obliterate her in court, and I'm going to fund every single second of it. Devin stared at me in absolute shock. A slow, relieved smile finally broke across his face. You have been playing them this whole time. I just wanted a peaceful life, I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. But Caroline crossed a line today that cannot be uncrossed. Tell me the name of the best lawyer you know. I will wire the retainer to their trust account right now so they can start drafting the emergency order before Caroline even lands in the Caribbean. Devin gave me the name of a top-tier legal firm in Manhattan. I opened my banking app, eager to transfer the $50,000 from my primary checking account. I typed in my password and waited for the dashboard to load. When the screen refreshed, I stopped breathing. I blinked hard, assuming there was a glitch in the app. I refreshed the page again. My available balance was 0. My heart slammed against my chest. I quickly clicked into my recent transactions. My eyes scanned the screen, widening in sheer horror. There was a pending charge for $15,000 at an ultra-luxury resort in St. Bart's. Right below it were 3 charges totaling $8,000 at a designer luggage boutique, followed by a massive charge to a premium airline for 2 first-class upgrades. Caroline had not just stolen my seat on the plane. Years ago, when Leo and Mia were babies, I had given her a credit card as an authorized user, explicitly telling her it was strictly for emergency groceries or medical supplies for the twins. She had kept that card hidden all these years. And today, to fund her romantic getaway with Brad, she had completely drained my primary account. I stared at the screen, my mind racing to comprehend the sheer scale of the theft. Years ago, when Leo and Mia were just toddlers, I had handed Caroline a credit card linked directly to my primary checking account. I told her it was strictly for emergencies. It was meant for baby formula diapers or doctor copays if she ever found herself in a tight spot. She swore she lost that card a long time ago. She lied. She had kept it hidden in her wallet, waiting for the perfect moment. And today, to fund her romantic getaway with a man she barely knew, she used it to bleed me dry. I clicked on the transaction details, my eyes scanning the damage. The St. Bart's resort charge was still pending a massive $15,000 authorization hold. The designer luggage and the premium airline tickets had already posted. Caroline thought because I let her walk all over me in the past, I would just sit down and take this. My family always treated me like an emotionless ATM, expecting me to quietly absorb the financial blow to keep the peace. She thought I would cry. I did not cry. A terrifying icy calm washed over me. Devin was still looking at me, sensing the sudden shift in my demeanor. Amanda, what is it? He asked, stepping closer. You look like you just saw a ghost. I did not answer him immediately. I pulled up my bank contact list and hit the number for the executive fraud division. As a high net worth client, I had a dedicated line. A representative named Mark answered on the second ring. Mark, I need you to flag a series of transactions immediately, I said, my voice steady and completely void of emotion. An authorized user card attached to my account was stolen and is currently being used for fraudulent international charges. Mark immediately went into professional crisis mode. He asked for the transaction details, and I read them off one by one. The flights, the luggage, and the massive resort hold in the Caribbean. I need the card canceled right now, I instructed. And I need you to initiate a hard chargeback on the St. Bart's resort transaction. Tell their merchant services that the card is stolen and the authorization is entirely revoked. Do not let a single cent clear. Mark typed rapidly on his end. Consider it done, ma'am. The card is permanently deactivated as of this second. The resort's authorization will drop immediately, and their billing department will receive an automated notification regarding the fraudulent status of the card. I thanked him and hung up the phone. Caroline thought she was going to enjoy a free 5-star vacation on my dime. Instead, she was about to find herself standing in a foreign country with a piece of useless plastic. Devin was staring at me in absolute disbelief. Amanda, did she steal your money? How are we going to pay the lawyer now? Caroline just took everything you had. I looked at him and offered a cold, reassuring smile. I told you, Devin, my family thinks I am broke because I let them think that. That was just my decoy checking account. It is where I keep my pocket change so my parents do not get suspicious when I pay for their dinners. I opened a different app on my phone, the one connected to my private wealth management firm. I dialed my portfolio manager, a sharp woman named Beatrice, who handled the bulk of my tech industry stock options and my real estate returns. My family always mocked my remote work from home job. They had absolutely no idea that as a chief operating officer for a global tech firm, I negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions. Beatrice, I need a liquid transfer of $100,000 moved to my secondary checking account immediately, I said, the moment she answered. I have a legal retainer to pay today, and I want a healthy buffer for any additional court fees. Of course, Amanda. Beatrice replied smoothly, not even questioning the amount. The funds are moving now and will be available in your secondary account in 2 minutes. I hung up and showed the refreshed screen to Devin. The crisp 6-figure balance sat there ready to be deployed. His jaw practically hit the pavement. I move millions of dollars before my family even wakes up in the morning, I reminded him. Caroline draining 15 grand from a dummy account is a minor inconvenience to me. To her, it is going to be the end of her life as she knows it. I immediately opened the wire transfer portal and sent $50,000 straight into his lawyer's trust account. Call them, I told Devin, pointing at his phone. Tell them the money is sitting in their account right now. Tell them they need to file the emergency ex parte custody order to strip Caroline of her parental rights before the sun goes down today. Devin did not waste another second. He pulled out his phone and made the call, pacing the length of the parking garage as he spoke to the legal team. The wheels of justice were finally turning in his favor, fueled by the very money Caroline thought she had stolen from me. I watched him wipe tears of profound relief from his eyes as the lawyer confirmed they were drafting the emergency order immediately. For the first time in 6 months, Devin looked like he could actually breathe. The suffocating weight of my family's racist, manipulative legal warfare was lifting off his shoulders. We stood by his SUV, watching Leo and Mia sleep peacefully in the back seat. They were safe. They were with their father. Now it was time to go on the offensive. Suddenly, my phone started ringing in my hand. I looked down at the screen. It was an international number. I did not recognize the country code, but I had a very good feeling I knew exactly where it was coming from. I answered the call and put it on speaker so Devin could hear every word. Hello, is this Amanda? A professional, highly strained voice asked on the other end. Speaking, I replied calmly. This is the guest relations manager at the Grand Azure Resort in St. Bart's. I am calling regarding a guest who checked in using a credit card registered under your name. A Miss Caroline and her companion Brad. I smiled, locking eyes with Devin. Yes, what seems to be the problem? The manager lowered his voice clearly, trying to maintain his professional composure over the very distinct sounds of shouting in the background. Ma'am, the authorization on the card you provided has just been flagged as fraudulent and completely declined by your bank. Your guests are currently causing a massive disturbance in our front lobby. I listened to the frantic background noise through the phone speaker. A woman was screeching at the top of her lungs and a man was cursing loudly. The distinctive voice of my sister echoed all the way from the Caribbean. The manager cleared his throat trying to speak over the chaos. Ma'am, the individuals attempting to check in are extremely agitated. They are demanding we force the authorization through claiming it is a simple bank error. It is not a bank error, I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. That card was stolen. I have already reported it to the Executive Fraud Division. Under no circumstances are you to provide them with accommodation, meals, or services under my name. If they cannot provide an alternate form of payment, I suggest you ask them to leave the premises. The manager sounded profoundly relieved. Thank you for the clarification, ma'am. We will handle the situation accordingly. Have a good day. He hung up. Devin stared at me, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and sheer disbelief. He shook his head slowly. You just left her stranded in St. Bart's. I did not leave her stranded, I corrected him. I simply stopped paying for her crimes. She can figure out her own way home. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone lit up again. This time it was Caroline's number. I accepted the call and put it back on speaker so Devin could hear exactly what we were dealing with. Amanda, unfreeze the card right now! Caroline shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. Do you have any idea how embarrassed Brad is? The concierge just told us to leave the lobby. Everyone is staring at us. You are ruining my life. I leaned against Devin's car, crossing my arms. I did not freeze the card, Caroline. The fraud department did. Because you stole it. I did not steal it, she screamed back, the entitlement dripping from every syllable. You gave it to me for emergencies. This is an emergency. Brad and I need to relax, and you are being incredibly selfish. Just call the bank and tell them you authorized the $15,000. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. You abandoned your 6-year-old twins next to a trash can at the airport. You lied to their father to prevent a wellness check. You tried to drain my bank account to fund a romantic getaway with a guy you met 3 months ago. I am not calling the bank, Caroline. That card is permanently deactivated. Enjoy economy class on your way back. If you can even afford the baggage fees. You are a monster, she wailed, but I did not stay on the line to hear the rest of her tantrum. I pressed the end call button, cutting off her screeching instantly. The silence lasted exactly 1 minute before the phone rang a third time. It was my mother. Patricia was clearly on the warpath. I answered, already bracing myself for the venom. Amanda, pay for your sister's room immediately. Patricia commanded, not even bothering to say hello. Caroline just called me, sobbing. She is standing outside the resort with all her luggage. You are humiliating this family over a few $1,000s. A few $1,000s? I repeated, my tone icy. It was $15,000, Mom, plus the first-class flights and the designer bags she bought on my dime. If you care so much about her luxury vacation, why do not you and Dad pay for it? Hand the concierge your credit card and fix her mess like you always do. There was a sudden, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. When my mother finally spoke, her voice lacked its usual arrogant bite. It was strained, bordering on panicked. We cannot use our cards. Amanda. Patricia admitted, her tone defensive. Your father and I have zero available credit right now. We do not have the cash to bail her out. I frowned, exchanging a confused look with Devin. What are you talking about? You and Dad have excellent credit. You have hundreds of thousands in savings. Not anymore. Patricia snapped, her frustration boiling over. We just remortgaged the house last week. We took out a massive home equity line of credit and liquidated our primary savings accounts. You did what I asked, absolutely stunned. Why would you liquidate your savings? Because we are investing in our family's future, Patricia declared proudly, her arrogance returning. Brad gave us the opportunity of a lifetime. We gave him $200,000 to fund his new tech startup. It is going to make millions, Amanda. So stop being so stingy and pay for your sister's hotel room until our return on investment comes through next month. I hung up the phone, completely speechless. My parents had remortgaged the house I grew up in to hand $200,000 in cash to Caroline's new boyfriend. They literally bet their entire financial future on a man who could not even afford his own vacation. Devin was staring at me, his jaw clenched tight. Did she just say they gave Brad $200,000 for a tech startup? Yes, I whispered, pulling my laptop out of my bag right there in the parking garage. I balanced it on the hood of Devin's SUV and opened it. I have been in the tech industry for a decade. I know every major player, every venture capital firm, and every legitimate startup incubator on the East Coast. Give me 2 minutes. I connected to my mobile hotspot and logged into a proprietary corporate database I used for vetting potential acquisitions at my company. I typed in Brad's full name, the one Caroline had proudly plastered all over her social media for the last 12 weeks. I pulled up his business registration records, cross-referencing his state tax filings and corporate history. My eyes scanned the glowing screen, tracing the digital paper trail. The color drained from my face as the absolute truth materialized in front of me. Devin leaned over my shoulder. "What is it? What do you see?" I pointed at the screen, my finger tracing a series of massive red flags. "Brad does not own a tech startup, Devin. This is a shell corporation. It was registered 4 weeks ago to a virtual mailbox in Delaware. There is no product, no staff, no patented intellectual property. It is entirely empty." I clicked into the associated legal filings linked to Brad's name. A long list of civil judgments and fraud warnings popped up on the screen. He is running a massive Ponzi scheme. I said, the gravity of the situation fully sinking in. He targets wealthy older couples through their vulnerable daughters. He takes their cash promises a massive return and funnels the money into offshore accounts before disappearing. Devin looked horrified. "Your parents just gave a professional con artist their life savings." "Yes," I replied, closing my laptop with a sharp snap. "And since they maxed out their credit to do it, they are completely broke. Caroline is stranded in a foreign country with a fraudster who is currently carrying my parents' entire net worth in his pockets. The golden child did not just abandon her kids today. She inadvertently bankrupted our entire family." I closed my laptop, the sharp snap echoing in the concrete parking garage. Devin stood frozen, his eyes locked on the dark screen, as the reality of my parents' financial ruin washed over him. We did not say another word. We carefully transferred Leo and Mia from the SUV into Devin's house. It was a modest, warm home filled with pictures of the twins and books on pediatric medicine. Devin carried them gently upstairs, tucking them into their beds. I stood in the doorway, watching a father who had been systematically destroyed by my family finally breathe a sigh of relief as he pulled the blankets over his sleeping children. Downstairs in the kitchen, Devin poured 2 cups of black coffee. He slid one across the granite island to me. His hands were still shaking slightly. "I do not understand, Amanda." He said, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "If Brad is a broke con artist, how is Caroline paying for her lifestyle? She lives in a $10,000 a month penthouse downtown. Your parents constantly brag about how her influencer sponsorships pay for everything. She wore a $5,000 watch to our last mediation hearing just to mock me. Where is the money coming from?" I took a slow sip of the coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me. I set the mug down and looked him dead in the eye. "She does not pay for the penthouse, Devin. I do." Devin choked on his coffee. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and opened my real estate management portal. My company owns that entire luxury high-rise. I purchased the building 3 years ago under a private LLC. When you two separated and Caroline got temporary custody, she demanded my parents buy her a place fitting her status. They begged me to help. I let her move into the top-floor penthouse completely rent-free. I only did it because I wanted to guarantee Leo and Mia had a safe, stable roof over their heads. I absorbed the massive monthly financial loss just to protect your children. Devin stared at me, his face a mixture of absolute shock and mounting anger. "She told the judge she paid for that place herself," he whispered. "She submitted fraudulent income statements to the family court, claiming she was a wildly successful social media influencer. Your parents sat on the witness stand and backed her up. They looked right at me and told the judge I was a deadbeat who could not provide the lifestyle their daughter had earned." "I know," I replied coldly. "My parents loved the illusion of the golden child. They loved going to their country club and boasting about Caroline's imaginary real estate portfolio, while simultaneously telling everyone I was just a struggling single girl working a low-level remote job. I let them live in their fantasy world because it kept the twins safe. But the second Caroline abandoned Leo and Mia next to a trash can today, that free ride ended." I opened my laptop again, right there on Devin's kitchen island. I accessed my property management software and pulled up Caroline's file. Because she pays no rent and has no formal lease, she is legally classified as an at-will tenant. But since she just committed a felony and abandoned the premises, I am exercising my right as the property owner to terminate her occupancy immediately. I typed rapidly, drafting a formal 3-day notice to quit. I cited violation of the law, child endangerment, and property abandonment. I connected to Devon's wireless printer. The machine whirred to life, spitting out the legal document that would render my sister homeless. I folded the eviction notice and slid it into my jacket pocket. We need to go to the penthouse right now, I told Devon. The kids have been wearing the same clothes since yesterday. They need their comfort items, their favorite toys, and proper pajamas for tonight. Since I own the building, I have the master override codes for the smart locks. We are going in, we are packing their things, and I am changing the security protocols so she can never step foot in that building again. We drove downtown in silence, the weight of the impending legal war settling over us. The luxury high-rise stood tall against the city skyline, a monument to the lies my family had built. We bypassed the front desk and took the private elevator straight to the top floor. I punched my master code into the digital keypad. The heavy mahogany door clicked open. The penthouse was a disaster. Caroline had clearly ransacked the place packing for her Caribbean getaway. Designer clothes were strewn across the velvet sofas. Empty champagne bottles littered the marble countertops. Devon walked through the lavish space, shaking his head in disgust as he took in the sheer opulence Caroline had flaunted while actively trying to destroy his career. We split up to gather the twins' belongings. I went into Leo and Mia's room to pack their clothes while Devon walked into the master bedroom to retrieve a specific specialized asthma inhaler Caroline kept in her nightstand for Leo. A few minutes passed. The penthouse was dead quiet, save for the sound of me zipping up a duffel bag. Then I heard Devon call my name. His voice did not just sound surprised, it sounded completely gutted. Amanda, get in here right now. I dropped the duffel bag and hurried down the hallway, stepping into the massive master suite. Devon was standing frozen next to Caroline's unmade California king bed. He had shifted the heavy mattress to reach a drawer underneath the frame. In his hands, he held a thick, hidden manila folder he had just pulled from a secret compartment. His hands were shaking violently as he stared at the documents inside. I stepped into the master bedroom and found Devon staring at a thick stack of papers. The color had completely drained from his face. His chest was heaving as if he had just run a marathon, and his hands were trembling so violently that the papers rustled against each other. What is it? I asked, moving quickly to his side. What did you find? Devon could not even speak. He just handed me the top sheet of paper. I took it, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. It was a promissory note for a high-yield personal loan from a predatory lending company. The principal amount was $40,000. The interest rate was staggering. I looked down at the bottom of the page. There was a signature there. It was Devon's name, but the handwriting was distinctly Caroline's looped dramatic cursive. I flipped to the next page. It was another loan document from a different online bank. This one was for $25,000. I kept flipping. Credit card applications, personal lines of credit. All approved, all maxed out. Every single document was filled out, using Devon's social security number, his medical license information, and his previous home address. She stole your identity, I whispered, the sheer scale of the federal crimes materializing right in front of my eyes. Devon dropped onto the edge of the bare mattress, burying his face in his hands. Last month, my application for a new apartment was denied, he said, his voice cracking. The leasing agent told me my credit score had plummeted by 200 points. I thought my identity had been compromised in some data breach at the hospital. I have been spending hours on the phone with credit bureaus trying to figure out what happened. It was her. It was my own ex-wife. I looked at the dates on the loan approvals. They all coincided exactly with the time frame when Caroline met Brad. She had not just drained my emergency bank account today. For the past 3 months, she had been systematically destroying Devon's financial future to fund Brad's fake tech startup and their lavish lifestyle. She ruined my credit right in the middle of a custody battle. Devon choked out, lifting his head to look at me with tears streaming down his face. Do you know what that means in family court? It means when the judge looks at my background, I look like an unstable liability. I look like a man who cannot manage his finances, who cannot provide a secure home for his children. She painted me as an aggressive, deadbeat father to the police, and then she financially crippled me in the shadows, so I could not even afford to fight back. The profound sociopathic cruelty of my sister's actions made my blood run cold. Caroline had not just tried to win a divorce. She had actively tried to eradicate a good, loving father from the earth just to maintain her own golden child illusion. I knelt down in front of Devon, placing my hands firmly on his knees. I looked him dead in the eye, letting all the quiet, calculated rage I had harbored for 34 years rise to the surface. "Listen to me, Devon," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "She is not going to get away with this. These documents are proof of wire fraud and identity theft. These are federal crimes. My family has spent their entire lives protecting her, but they cannot protect her from the federal government. I am going to obliterate her. I am going to take everything she has, and then I am going to make sure she spends the next decade in a jumpsuit." Devon nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the raw despair finally giving way to a hardened resolve. I stood up and grabbed the entire manila folder, shoving it securely into my briefcase next to my laptop. Then I pulled out my phone and opened my property management dashboard. It was time to secure the perimeter. I navigated to the access control panel for the penthouse. With 3 taps, I deleted Caroline's biometric data from the smart lock system. I changed the master override codes and permanently deactivated her digital key fob. Next, I dialed the front desk of the building. The head concierge answered immediately. "This is Amanda, the property owner," I stated, speaking in my sharpest executive tone. "The tenant in Penthouse Unit A is no longer a resident of this building. I have remotely disabled her access. I need you to immediately revoke her parking garage privileges and blacklist both her and her guest Brad from the lobby. If she attempts to enter the premises, she is to be treated as a trespasser. Do not let her pass the front doors." "Understood completely, ma'am," the concierge replied without hesitation. "I will alert the security team right now." I ended the call and turned to Devon. "Grab the kids' bags. We are done here." We walked out of the penthouse, our footsteps echoing in the empty, luxurious hallway. I pulled the heavy mahogany door shut behind us. The smart lock chimed a sharp metallic click that signaled the end of Caroline's rent-free kingdom. The tomb was officially sealed. We drove back to Devon's house in a focused silence. The twins were still fast asleep upstairs, completely unaware of the absolute war their aunt and father were waging on their behalf. We sat down at Devon's dining room table, spreading the forged loan documents and my bank fraud logs across the wood surface. I opened my laptop to begin compiling the digital evidence binder for the high-powered Manhattan lawyer I had just retained. Just as I was categorizing the fraudulent credit card charges, my phone buzzed violently on the table. It was a text message from my mother. "Look what you made her do," the message read. "You are a jealous, vindictive monster." Attached to the text was a link to Instagram. I clicked the link. The app opened instantly, throwing me into a live broadcast. Caroline was streaming live to her thousands of followers. The setting was jarring. She was not in a luxury resort or a first-class cabin. She was sitting on a hard metal bench in what looked like a crowded, non-air-conditioned airport terminal in the Caribbean. Her designer makeup was running down her face in dark streaks. Her hair was disheveled, and she was clutching her phone with trembling hands, putting on an absolute masterclass in performative victimhood. "Guys, I need help," Caroline sobbed into the camera, hyperventilating as she wiped away fake tears. "I am stranded in a foreign country. My sister Amanda. She has always been so deeply jealous of me. I let her handle my finances because I trusted her, and she just hacked into all my bank accounts. She froze my cards and stole all my money while I was on the airplane." She let out a dramatic, shuddering gasp, looking around the busy terminal as if she were in mortal danger. "Brad and I have nowhere to go. The hotel kicked us out. We have no food, no water, and no way to buy a ticket home. My sister is trying to ruin my life because she hates seeing me happy. Please, if anyone can spare anything, I am linking my Cash app below." I stared at the screen, watching the comments flood in at lightning speed. Her followers were outraged. They were sending her money, leaving comments calling me a psychopath, a criminal, and a bitter, lonely woman. Caroline was leveraging her fake influencer status to scam her followers out of plane ticket money by painting me as a deranged hacker. I watched the screen as the viewer count on Caroline's live broadcast skyrocketed past 10,000. The comments scrolling up the side of the video were a blur of absolute vitriol directed entirely at me. People who had never met me were calling for my arrest, tagging the FBI and sending Caroline hundreds of dollars through her Cash App link to save her from her evil, jealous sister. My phone began vibrating non-stop against the dining room table. The smear campaign had officially breached our hometown social circle. My mother had clearly shared the link to the extended family group chat. A text from my Aunt Brenda popped up first. Reading, "I always knew you were a bitter, lonely girl, but stranding your own flesh and blood in a foreign country is pure evil. You are dead to this family." Right beneath it, a message from my cousin Jared arrived, calling me a psychopath and threatening to call the police on me himself. Devin stared at my phone, his eyes wide with rising panic as the notifications flooded the screen. "Amanda, they are destroying your reputation," he said, his voice tight with anxiety. "Half the people in our hometown are watching this right now. She is raising thousands of dollars off a complete lie. We have to post a response. We have to show them the text messages where she abandoned Leo and Mia." I picked up my phone, calmly swiped down to the control center, and tapped the Do Not Disturb icon. The relentless buzzing stopped instantly. I set the phone face down on the table and looked at Devin with absolute unshakable calm. "We are not posting anything, Devin," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "Let her cry for her digital audience. Social media outrage means absolutely nothing in a court of law. Judges do not care about Instagram comments or Cash App donations. They care about paper trails, digital footprints, and federal statutes. While she is busy playing the victim on the internet, I am going to bury her in reality." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a stack of heavy-duty manila folders. I spent the next 3 hours compiling an airtight binder of absolute destruction. I printed the fraud logs from my bank, clearly showing the geolocation and device identification of the person who booked the Caribbean resort. It matched Caroline's phone perfectly. I printed the text message where she bragged about needing a child-free reset, alongside the time-stamped email where she lied to Devin about taking the twins to a remote cabin. I added the forged high-yield loan documents she took out under Devin's social security number. Finally, I drafted a formal legal demand for the airport security footage from JFK Terminal 4, which would show exactly who walked away from two crying 6-year-old children. By early afternoon, we were sitting in the pristine glass-walled conference room of the most ruthless family law firm in Manhattan. I had wired a massive retainer to secure their top litigator, a razor-sharp woman named Veronica Caldwell. Veronica did not do pleasantries, she did demolition. I slid the thick binder across the polished mahogany table. Veronica opened it, her eyes tracking rapidly over the bank logs, the text messages, and the forged loan documents. The further she read, the sharper her smile became. She claimed she was broke to secure maximum alimony, but she is funneling stolen funds into a shell corporation run by a known fraudster. Veronica summarized, tapping a perfectly manicured fingernail against the documents. She committed felony child abandonment across international borders. She committed wire fraud. And she weaponized the family court system by filing a baseless restraining order against a medical professional to facilitate a kidnapping. Veronica looked up, locking eyes with Devin. "Dr. Devin, I have seen a lot of sociopathic behavior in my career, but your ex-wife is about to set a new legal precedent for self-destruction." Devin let out a long, ragged breath. "Can we get my kids back permanently? Can we dissolve the restraining order today?" "We are doing more than that," Veronica stated, turning to her paralegal, who was typing furiously in the corner. "We are filing an emergency ex parte custody petition right now. I am walking this directly to a judge I know very well. We are going to strip her of all legal and physical custody, and I will be forwarding these forged loan documents directly to the federal prosecutor's office." Veronica pulled her laptop closer, logging into the state's family court database to pull Caroline's previous filings. "I want to see exactly what she submitted during the initial separation," Veronica murmured, her eyes scanning the digital archives. "Let us see what other financial lies she put on the record." The room fell silent as Veronica clicked through the heavily redacted financial disclosures Caroline had submitted to the judge 6 months ago to paint Devin as a financial risk. Suddenly, Veronica stopped scrolling. Her sharp demeanor faltered for just a fraction of a second, replaced by a look of genuine, chilling horror. She slowly turned her laptop around and pushed it across the table toward Devin and me. I suggest you look at the newly filed addendum. She slipped into the court records 2 days before she left for the Caribbean. Veronica said, her voice dropping to a grave whisper. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the heavily stamped legal document. My blood ran completely cold. It was a massive comprehensive life insurance policy. But it was not on Caroline's life. Caroline had secretly taken out a multi-million-dollar life insurance policy on the twins and on Devin. And listed right there in bold black ink as the sole secondary beneficiary in the event of Caroline's absence was Brad. The silence in the conference room was absolute and suffocating. The reality of that life insurance policy hung in the air like a physical weight. Caroline had not just planned a luxury vacation. She had planned a highly lucrative exit strategy, betting millions of dollars on the lives of her own 6-year-old twins and her ex-husband, with a known con artist listed as the secondary beneficiary. Veronica closed her laptop with a sharp, definitive snap. We are going to court, she stated, her voice devoid of any warmth. Right now. The next morning, the fluorescent lights of the Manhattan family court felt blinding. Devin and I sat at the polished wooden table reserved for the petitioner. Devin was wearing his best suit, his hands folded tightly in front of him, his knuckles white. I sat beside him, projecting an image of absolute, unbreakable calm. Veronica stood at the head of our table, her posture radiating predatory confidence. On the large television monitor mounted to the courtroom wall, Caroline's expensive attorney appeared via Zoom. My parents had hired him, draining their newly remortgaged house funds to secure a partner at a prestigious, aggressive law firm. The man looked smug, adjusting his silk tie as he prepared to steamroll a father fighting for his children. Judge Thompson, a stern woman with decades of experience on the bench, called the emergency hearing to order. Your Honor. Caroline's lawyer began, his tone dripping with condescension. This emergency hearing is completely baseless. My client is a devoted mother who simply took a few days of much-needed, well-deserved personal time after a highly contentious divorce. She left her children in the care of her sister Amanda, who is a designated family caregiver. The only real emergency here is that Dr. Devin showed up at an international airport, directly and aggressively violating a standing restraining order. We ask that the court uphold the order and sanction him for this blatant harassment. The lawyer smiled confidently at the camera. He thought this was going to be a simple open and shut case. He thought he was dealing with a bitter ex-husband and a jealous sister. He had no idea what was sitting in the binder on our table. Veronica stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She simply picked up the thick manila binder, walked directly to the bench, and handed it to Judge Thompson. Your Honor, my client did not violate a restraining order to harass his ex-wife. Veronica stated, her voice ringing clearly through the silent courtroom. He was called to the airport by the aunt of these children because Caroline abandoned them next to a trash can in Terminal 4. Caroline's lawyer let out a loud, mocking scoff through the monitor. Your Honor, that is an absurd and defamatory allegation. I direct your attention to tab 1. Veronica continued, completely ignoring the interruption. You will see time-stamped airport security photos of the 6-year-old twins left completely unattended. Behind that is a text message from Caroline to her sister, explicitly stating she canceled Amanda's flight to upgrade her new boyfriend to first class. She then instructed Amanda to take the kids home because she needed a child-free reset. Judge Thompson opened the binder. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the rustle of the heavy paper. I watched the judge's eyes scan the photograph of Leo and Mia crying by the garbage can. The bored judicial neutrality on her face vanished, instantly replaced by a hardened look of absolute disgust. Opposing counsel claims, this was a simple miscommunication regarding a designated caregiver, Veronica said, stepping back and folding her hands. I direct the court to tab 2. This is an email Caroline sent to Dr. Devin late last night. She deliberately lied about the children's whereabouts, claiming they were going to a remote cabin with no cell service. She did this to intentionally prevent a police wellness check while she fled the country. Caroline's lawyer stammered through the television speakers. Your Honor, I have not seen any of these documents, my client assured me. I highly advise you to stop speaking counsel. Judge Thompson interrupted, her voice cracking like a whip. Veronica was not finished. Tab 3 contains forged loan documents. Caroline used Dr. Devon's social security number and medical license to take out over $60,000 in high-yield predatory loans to lifestyle, effectively destroying my client's credit score during an active custody battle. Judge Thompson flipped to the third tab, her jaw ticking. And finally, Your Honor, tab 4. Veronica said, her voice dropping to a grave, chilling register. 2 days before fleeing the country, Caroline took out a multi-million-dollar life insurance policy on the twins and on Dr. Devon. The secondary beneficiary listed on that policy is her new boyfriend, Brad, a man who is currently under federal investigation for running a massive corporate Ponzi scheme. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Caroline's expensive, smug lawyer stared at his webcam, his mouth slightly open, completely paralyzed. He realized in real time that my parents had paid him thousands of dollars to defend a woman who was actively committing federal fraud and felony child endangerment. Judge Thompson closed the binder. She did not look at the monitor. She looked directly at Devon. Dr. Devon, the judge said, her tone softening with genuine sympathy. The temporary restraining order filed against you is hereby vacated and dissolved immediately. The court finds it was filed under false pretenses and weaponized to facilitate child abandonment. I am granting you 100% sole legal and physical custody of your children effective as of this second. Devon let out a breathless, shattered sob. He dropped his head into his hands, his broad shoulders shaking as the nightmare of the last 6 months was instantly legally eradicated. I placed a hand on his back, feeling tears prick my own eyes. Furthermore, Judge Thompson continued, turning her sharp gaze back to the court reporter. I am drafting a bench warrant for the immediate arrest of Caroline. The charges will include felony child abandonment, child endangerment, and wire fraud. The moment she steps foot back on American soil, she will be taken into police custody. We are adjourned. The gavel fell with a sharp, satisfying crack. It was over. The golden child's invincible armor had been completely shattered by the very legal system she tried to manipulate. Devon stood up and pulled me into a crushing, tearful hug. Thank you, he whispered into my shoulder. You gave me my kids back. You gave me my life back. I hugged him tightly, feeling a profound sense of justice wash over me. We gathered our things and walked out of the courtroom, the heavy wooden doors swinging shut behind us. We had won the most important battle. Leo and Mia were safe permanently. As we walked down the marble hallway toward the elevators, I felt a deep, vibrating buzz in my jacket pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was an urgent alert from the Commercial Security System app linked to my real estate LLC. I unlocked the screen and opened the live video feed. The camera angle showed the luxurious mahogany-lined hallway of the downtown penthouse. Standing right in front of the heavy front door, looking sunburned, disheveled, and incredibly furious, were Caroline and Brad. Caroline was frantically swiping her deactivated keycard against the smart lock scanner. The small light on the keypad was flashing a bright, unrelenting red, denying her entry. She had been forced to fly home early after her stolen funds were frozen, and she had absolutely no idea that she was currently trying to break into a building that I owned. 48 hours after she strutted onto a first-class flight sipping complimentary champagne, Caroline returned to American soil looking like absolute garbage, because I had frozen the stolen funds. Caroline and Brad had been unceremoniously escorted off the luxury resort property by local authorities. With no active credit cards and their cash entirely depleted, they spent an agonizing day and a half sitting on the sticky, non-air-conditioned floor of a Caribbean airport terminal. They were forced to beg the airline to let them fly standby on a budget carrier. They spent the entire flight squeezed into middle seats near the rear lavatories, surrounded by screaming toddlers, a sharp contrast to the child-free reset she had so proudly bragged about. When they finally dragged themselves through the pristine, marble-lined lobby of the downtown high-rise, they looked like vagrants. Caroline's expensive blowout was matted with sweat. Her designer makeup was smeared into dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. Brad was trudging behind her, his charming facade completely wiped away by irritation. He was carrying a cheap plastic shopping bag, holding a few wrinkled shirts, as the Caribbean resort had confiscated his brand new designer luggage as collateral for the unpaid authorization hold. Caroline marched past the front desk without making eye contact with the staff. Her chin tilted up in a desperate failing attempt to maintain her air of superiority. She jabbed the elevator button for the top floor, glaring at the reflection of her ruined vacation in the polished brass doors. They stepped out of the elevator and walked down the quiet mahogany-paneled hallway toward the penthouse. Caroline marched up to the heavy double doors and pulled her digital key fob from her purse. She slapped it against the smart lock scanner, expecting the familiar welcoming chime. Instead, the scanner emitted a harsh, flat beep. The LED indicator flashed a bright, solid red. Caroline let out an exasperated sigh. She rubbed the key fob against her designer jacket, assuming the sensor was just dirty, and slapped it against the reader a second time. Beep. Red light. Brad dropped his plastic bag onto the plush hallway carpet, running a hand over his face. "You have got to be kidding me, Caroline," he muttered, his voice dripping with annoyance. "We just spent 2 days sleeping on an airport floor. Open the door so I can take a shower." "I am trying!" Caroline snapped back, her voice echoing shrilly in the quiet corridor. "The battery on this stupid lock must be dead. My sister is probably the one who forgot to pay the maintenance fee." She slammed her fist against the heavy wood as if physical force would somehow override a digitally encrypted security system. When the door remained firmly shut, she stomped over to the hallway intercom system and mashed the button connecting to the lobby concierge. "Mr. Thorne, get up here right now," Caroline commanded the second the line clicked open, treating the building manager like a personal servant. "The smart lock on my penthouse is malfunctioning. Bring the master key immediately." There was a brief pause on the other end of the intercom. "I will be right up, ma'am," the concierge replied, his tone devoid of its usual warmth. Less than 2 minutes later, the elevator doors slid open. Mr. Thorne stepped out, but he was not holding a master key, and he was not alone. Flanked on either side of him were two imposing, broad-shouldered private security guards. Caroline crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently. "Finally. Open this door immediately. My jealous sister hacked my bank accounts while I was out of the country, and I am in absolutely no mood for a building glitch." Mr. Thorne stopped a few feet away, clasping his hands politely in front of him. "There is no glitch with the system, ma'am," he stated with practiced professional detachment. "Your access to this unit has been permanently revoked by the property owner." Caroline let out a loud, mocking laugh, looking back at Brad as if this were the most ridiculous thing she had ever heard. "Revoked by the owner. Do you have any idea who you are talking to? I own this place. Do you know who my parents are? My father is a highly respected investor in this city. My family practically funds this entire zip code. Open the door before I have you fired." Mr. Thorne did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply raised his hand and pointed directly at the center of the mahogany door, right at Caroline's eye level. "I strongly advise you to read the legal document affixed to the premises," he said calmly. Caroline whipped her head around. For the first time in her blind rage, she noticed a bright white piece of paper taped securely to the wood. She snatched it off the door, her eyes scanning the bold black text at the top of the page. 3-day notice to quit, pay, or vacate. It was an official court-recognized eviction notice issued by a corporate entity named Horizon Real Estate, LLC. Caroline's eyes rapidly scanned the specific causes listed for her immediate removal. Violation of the law, child endangerment, property abandonment. "What is this garbage?" Caroline shrieked, waving the paper in the air. "Horizon Real Estate. I have never even heard of this fake company. My sister probably printed this out at her little remote customer service job just to be vindictive." Brad stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the legal document in her hand. The irritation on his face was rapidly transforming into cold suspicion. "Caroline, what is going on here? I thought you said you bought this penthouse outright with your influencer money." "I did." Caroline lied flawlessly, turning back to the concierge with a look of absolute unhinged entitlement. "This is an illegal eviction. My sister is trying to lock me out of my own home because she is a bitter, lonely woman who wants to ruin my life." "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you and your guest to vacate the hallway immediately," Mr. Thorne said, gesturing toward the elevator. You are officially trespassing on private property. If you do not leave, security will escort you out. Caroline's face flushed a deep, furious crimson. She thought I was just a powerless tenant in her golden, untouchable life. She genuinely believed that because I had quietly absorbed her abuse for decades, I was incapable of wielding any real power against her. She thought this eviction was nothing more than a petty, easily reversible prank. Nobody is escorting me anywhere, Caroline snarled, pulling her smartphone from her pocket. You want to play games? Fine, let us play. She aggressively tapped the screen, dialing 911. She held the phone to her ear, staring down the building manager with a triumphant, malicious smirk. Yes, operator, I need police dispatch to the downtown luxury high-rise immediately. Caroline cried into the receiver, instantly switching her voice to sound like a terrified, helpless victim. My home is currently being burglarized. My deranged sister is trying to illegally evict me, and the building staff is threatening me. Send officers right now. She hung up the phone and crossed her arms, looking at Brad as if she had just brilliantly solved the problem. What she did not realize was that by calling the police to the scene of a property I legally owned, she was sealing the doors of her own trap. I snapped my briefcase shut, the sharp click echoing in the tense silence of the hallway. The older police officer turned his full attention to Caroline, taking a deliberate step forward. Ma'am, I am going to tell you this one last time. The officer warned, his hand gesturing toward the elevator bank. You need to leave this building, now. Caroline was hyperventilating. Her chest heaved as her eyes darted frantically around the corridor, searching for any possible loophole, any willing victim to manipulate. She looked at Mr. Thorne, who stared blankly over her head. She looked at the security guards who had physically positioned themselves between her and the penthouse door. Finally, she whipped her head around to look at Brad. Brad, do something! Caroline pleaded, her voice rising to a shrill, desperate pitch. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them who my parents are. Brad did not move to comfort her. He did not step forward to defend her. He was already halfway down the hall, standing just inches from the open elevator doors. The charming, confident persona he had worn for the past 3 months was completely gone, replaced by the panicked, calculating look of a cornered rat. He looked at Caroline, then looked at the 2 police officers standing just feet away. He knew that if the police started running names, his massive string of federal fraud warrants would pop up in their system instantly. Brad, where are you going? Caroline cried out, finally noticing his retreat. Brad pressed the lobby button on the elevator panel. He looked back at her, his expression twisting into a mask of pure disgust. You told me you were rich. He spat, his voice echoing down the corridor. You told me you owned this penthouse. You told me your sister was just your pathetic broke assistant. I am rich, Caroline shrieked, stepping toward him before a security guard blocked her path. My parents have money. They just invested $200,000 in your startup. Brad let out a harsh, mocking laugh. Yeah, well, unfortunately for you, your parents are tapped out. And apparently, you are just a squatter living on your sister's charity. I do not do charity cases, Caroline. The elevator doors began to slide shut. Brad, do not you dare leave me here, Caroline screamed, lunging forward, desperate to grab the closing doors. She was too late. The brass doors clicked shut, sealing Brad safely inside. The digital display above the elevator lit up, watching the numbers tick down as the man who was currently holding my parents' entire life savings in his pocket descended to the lobby, leaving Caroline entirely alone. Caroline stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, staring at the closed elevator doors. The reality of her situation was finally crashing down on her. Her boyfriend had abandoned her. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her home was gone. Her children had been legally taken from her. The golden, untouchable life she had spent her entire existence manipulating to maintain had been completely eradicated in less than 24 hours. She slowly turned back to face me. The fake tears were gone. The panicked desperation was gone. All that remained was raw, unadulterated hatred. You planned this, she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You waited until I was out of the country to steal my life. You are sick, Amanda. You have always been jealous of me. I picked up my briefcase, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. I did not steal your life, Caroline. I just stopped funding it. The older police officer cleared his throat, stepping into her line of sight. Ma'am, your guest has vacated the premises. You are now officially trespassing. I am giving you exactly 2 minutes to walk into that elevator or I am putting you in handcuffs. Caroline looked at the officers, realizing there was no way out. There were no parents here to scream at the authorities on her behalf. There was no money to buy her way out of the consequence. She looked down at the floor, her shoulders slumping in absolute defeat. She turned around and began the long, humiliating walk toward the service elevator, escorted closely by the 2 private security guards. She did not look back at me. She did not look at the penthouse door. She just stared at the carpet, her ruined designer shoes dragging heavily against the floor. I stood next to Mr. Thorne and the police officers, watching the golden child being marched out of my building like a common criminal. Thank you for your assistance, officers, I said politely, extending my hand to the older cop. I appreciate your prompt response. Just doing our jobs, ma'am, he replied, shaking my hand. Have a good evening. The police officers followed the security team toward the elevators. I turned back to the heavy mahogany door of the penthouse. I pressed my hand against the cool wood, taking a deep breath of the quiet, peaceful air in the hallway. The parasite had been removed. I walked back to the private resident elevator, eager to return to Devon's house to check on the twins. I pressed the lobby button, watching the city lights glitter through the glass walls of the elevator car as it descended. When the doors slid open in the grand lobby, I stepped out, expecting to see nothing but the night staff. Instead, I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing in the center of the marble lobby, looking utterly exhausted and furious, were my parents, Patricia and Richard. They had just arrived straight from the airport, their luggage piled haphazardly beside them. They had clearly rushed straight here after landing, intending to confront me about the frozen credit cards. And standing right in front of them, flanked by my building's security guards, was Caroline, clutching her single plastic bag of belongings. My parents looked from Caroline to the security guards, their faces twisting with outrage. Patricia spotted me stepping out of the elevator and her eyes went wide with fury. Patricia screamed, her voice echoing off the high marble ceilings, causing the few remaining residents in the lobby to stop and stare. How dare you lock your sister out of her own home? Give her the keys right now, you ungrateful brat. I watched the older police officer scrutinize the heavy watermarked deed to the building and the court-certified eviction notice I had just handed him. The air in the hallway was thick with tension. Caroline was still panting, her chest heaving as she waited for the officers to arrest me for burglary, exactly as she had demanded on her dramatic 911 call. Instead, the officer folded the documents and handed them back to me with a respectful nod. Ma'am, these documents are perfectly in order, the officer said, turning his body to face Caroline. The authority in his voice shifted entirely. You are not the owner of this property. You are a severely delinquent tenant who has been legally evicted. You have absolutely no right to be on this floor, and calling us under false pretenses of a burglary is a severe misuse of emergency services. Caroline's jaw dropped. The smug, victorious sneer she had been wearing instantly dissolved into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. She took a step back, her expensive heels wobbling on the carpet. That is impossible, she stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is just a remote customer service worker. She cannot afford a building like this. She forged those papers. Arrest her. The officer did not even entertain her delusion. His hand rested on his utility belt. I verified the LLC registry on my terminal while we were riding the elevator up. She is the legal property owner. You, however, are currently trespassing. At that exact moment, the carefully constructed fantasy world Caroline had lived in for her entire life shattered into a million irreparable pieces. But the most devastating blow did not come from me or the police. It came from the man standing right next to her. Brad had been entirely silent since I stepped out of the elevator. He had been watching the exchange with the calculating, predatory eyes of a professional con artist, assessing a burning building. When the police officer confirmed that I was the actual millionaire and that Caroline was nothing but a broke squatter, Brad's entire demeanor flipped like a switch. You lied to me, Brad shouted, his voice echoing sharply down the mahogany corridor. He stepped away from Caroline as if she had a contagious disease, his face twisting into a sneer of absolute disgust. Brad, please, Caroline begged, reaching out to grab his arm. I can explain. My parents have money. They just invested $200,000 in your startup. We can go stay at their house. Brad violently yanked his arm out of her grasp. Do not touch me, you broke fraud. You told me you were rich. You told me you owned this $10,000 a month penthouse outright. You spent the last 3 months telling me your sister was just your pathetic, jealous assistant who handled your influencer accounting. I am rich. Caroline shrieked, tears of actual terrified humiliation spilling over her eyelashes. The investment money from my parents is real. We can use it. Brad let out a harsh, mocking laugh that cut through her hysteria like a knife. Yeah, well, unfortunately for you, your parents just remortgaged their house to hand me that cash, which means they are as tapped out as you are. And I do not do charity cases, Caroline. I am out of here. He bent down, snatched the single designer duffel bag he had managed to salvage from the Caribbean resort, and marched straight toward the elevator bank. He slammed his hand against the call button. Caroline scrambled after him, completely abandoning whatever shred of dignity she had left. She fell to her knees in front of the elevator doors, grabbing the hem of his jacket. Brad, do not you dare leave me here, she sobbed, her voice cracking into a pathetic wail. We are supposed to be a team. You love me. I love money. Caroline, Brad spat, kicking his leg free from her grip, just as the brass elevator doors slid open. And you do not have a single dime to your name. He stepped into the elevator and pressed the lobby button. Caroline lunged forward desperately, trying to catch the doors, but she was too late. The heavy metal slid shut, sealing her newly bankrupt boyfriend safely inside. The digital display above the doors lit up, ticking down, as the man carrying our parents' entire life savings descended to the lobby, leaving Caroline entirely alone on the floor. Caroline stayed on her knees for a long moment, staring blankly at the closed elevator. The reality of her situation crushed the breath right out of her lungs. Her boyfriend had abandoned her. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her home was gone. Her children had been legally taken from her. The golden, untouchable life she had spent her entire existence manipulating to maintain had been eradicated in less than 24 hours. She slowly pushed herself up from the floor and turned back to face me. The fake tears were gone. All that remained was raw, venomous hatred. You planned this, she hissed, her voice dropping to a low, trembling whisper. You waited until I was out of the country to steal my life. I picked up my briefcase, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. I did not steal your life, Caroline. I just stopped funding it. The older police officer cleared his throat, stepping firmly into her line of sight. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, his expression hardening into stone. Ma'am, the domestic dispute is over. You are currently trespassing on private property, and the property owner has a court-ordered eviction notice. Where am I supposed to go? Caroline cried out, her anger instantly reverting to panicked victimhood. All my things are in there. My clothes, my jewelry. You cannot just throw me out on the street with nothing. The officer checked his heavy steel wristwatch. Because you called us here under the false pretense of a burglary, I am going to extend a courtesy that you do not legally deserve. I am giving you exactly 15 minutes to enter that unit and gather essential toiletries, basic medication, and one change of clothes. After that, my partner and I are physically escorting you off the premises. 15 minutes, Caroline shrieked. I have a closet worth $50,000 in there. I need suitcases. I need my designer bags. 14 minutes now, the female officer interjected, taking a step toward the penthouse door. Any property left inside will be moved to a storage facility by the landlord, and you will be provided with the access code at a later date. Move right now, or you leave with nothing but the clothes currently on your back. Realizing there was no parent here to scream at the authorities on her behalf, Caroline scrambled to her feet and rushed into the penthouse. The female officer shadowed her every move, making sure she did not try to destroy the unit or steal any fixtures. I stood in the hallway next to Mr. Thorne and the older officer, listening to the frantic sounds of drawers being yanked open and hangers crashing to the floor. Caroline was weeping loudly, mourning the loss of her unearned luxury as she scrambled to pack her shattered life into whatever she could find. Since her expensive luggage had been confiscated in St. Bart's, she had nothing to carry her items in. Exactly 15 minutes later, Caroline emerged from the penthouse. The sight of the golden child was almost unrecognizable. She was clutching a large, heavy-duty black trash bag filled with a haphazard assortment of toiletries, a pair of sweatpants, and a hairbrush. The woman who had boarded a first-class flight 2 days ago, demanding a child-free reset, was now standing in a hallway she no longer owned, holding a literal garbage bag. "Time is up," the older officer said, pointing toward the service elevator at the end of the hall. "Let us go." Caroline did not look at me. She did not say a word. She just stared at the carpet, her ruined designer shoes dragging heavily against the floor as she began the long, humiliating walk toward the service elevator, escorted closely by the two armed police officers. I followed them at a distance, stepping into the main resident elevator. I wanted to see this through to the very end. I wanted to ensure she was physically removed from the property boundaries. I rode down to the grand lobby, the city lights glittering through the glass walls of the elevator car. When the doors slid open, I stepped out onto the pristine marble floor. I looked toward the front entrance, expecting to see the police marching Caroline out onto the dark city street. Instead, I stopped dead in my tracks. A black Uber SUV had just violently lurched to a halt right at the curb outside the revolving glass doors. The passenger doors flew open, and my parents, Patricia and Richard, scrambled out. They looked absolutely frantic, exhausted, and furious, their own travel bags piled haphazardly beside them on the sidewalk. They had clearly rushed straight here from the airport, intending to confront me about the frozen credit cards. As they burst through the revolving doors into the lobby, they froze. Standing right in front of them, flanked by two police officers and holding a black plastic trash bag, was their precious golden child. Patricia dropped her oversized designer tote bag directly onto the polished marble floor. The heavy thud echoed through the cavernous lobby, drawing the attention of the concierge and the few residents waiting near the valet stand. For a split second, my mother simply stared at Caroline. Her eyes darted from her golden child's ruined makeup to the armed police officers, and finally to the cheap black garbage bag clutched tightly in Caroline's manicured hands. My father, Richard, bumped into Patricia from behind, nearly tripping over the dropped luggage. He caught his balance, his face flushed red from the stress of their frantic flight back to the city. He looked at the police officers with immediate indignation, assuming, as he always did, that the world had somehow wronged his favorite daughter. Then Patricia's eyes snapped past Caroline and locked onto me. I was standing quietly behind the building's private security team, my briefcase in hand, watching the final act of their delusion unfold. The moment my mother saw me, her shock morphed instantly into a blinding, irrational rage. She did not ask the police what had happened. She did not ask Caroline why she was holding a trash bag. In Patricia's mind, if Caroline was suffering, it was inherently my fault. "Amanda!" Patricia shrieked, her voice tearing through the quiet elegance of the lobby. She shoved past her own daughter and charged directly at me, her face contorted with fury. "How dare you lock your sister out of her own home? Give her the keys right now, you ungrateful brat!" One of my security guards, a tall, broad-shouldered man, immediately stepped into Patricia's path, holding his hand up firmly to stop her advance. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice and step back," he warned, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Patricia ignored him, trying to peer around his imposing frame to glare at me. "I know you froze her credit cards," Patricia yelled, completely unhinged by the public audience gathering around us. "Caroline called us from the airport sobbing because of your jealous little stunt. And now you are trying to humiliate her by locking her out. You call the front desk and fix this building glitch immediately." I stood perfectly still. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not lower my voice to accommodate her embarrassment. I looked at the woman who had demanded I babysit while my sister committed felony child abandonment. "There is no glitch, Mom." I stated, my words ringing crystal clear across the lobby. "And I cannot give her keys to a building she does not own. She has been legally evicted for violating her lease, engaging in federal wire fraud, and abandoning her 6-year-old children. She is officially trespassing." Caroline let out a loud, theatrical sob, dropping her trash bag onto the marble and burying her face in her hands. "She lied," Caroline wailed, leaning heavily against my father as he rushed to put a protective arm around her. "She hacked my bank accounts, Dad. She stole all my money while I was on the plane, and now she is trying to steal my penthouse." Richard pulled Caroline into a tight hug, glaring at me over her shoulder. His face was a mask of absolute arrogant disgust. You are a sick, twisted girl, Amanda, he barked, pointing a finger at me. Your sister just went through a horrific divorce. She is a single mother trying to rebuild her life, and you choose today to play your pathetic, vindictive games just because you are miserable and alone. Tell these rent-a-cops to back off and let my daughter into her apartment. The older police officer, who had personally escorted Caroline down the service elevator, stepped forward. He did not look amused by my father's aggressive posturing. Sir, I suggest you watch your tone, the officer cautioned sharply. That woman is the legal owner of this property. Your daughter is a squatter who was just escorted off the premises under a court-ordered eviction notice. If she attempts to access the residential floors again, she will be arrested for trespassing. Richard blinked, the officer's words bouncing off his thick skull. He looked from the police officer to me, a flicker of profound confusion crossing his features. Owner. What are you talking about? She works remote customer service. She does not own a luxury high-rise. I smiled, a cold, calculated expression that made my mother take a small step back. I own the LLC that holds the deed to this entire building, Dad. I let Caroline live here rent-free for the last 2 years because I wanted to make sure Leo and Mia had a safe place to sleep while she drained Devon's bank accounts in family court. But since she decided to abandon those children next to a garbage can today, her free ride is permanently over. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her chest. You owned this building the whole time and you let us pay for Caroline's lawyer. You let us worry about her finances, you deceitful, greedy little monster. I did not let you do anything, Mom. You chose to fund her lies because you loved pretending she was a wildly successful influencer. You loved bragging about her to your country club friends while treating me like dirt. I just let you live in the fantasy you created. I stepped slightly out from behind the security guard, making sure I had their full, undivided attention. She is completely broke, Mom. Brad just dumped her in the hallway upstairs because he found out she does not have a dime to her name. She is homeless. And since you and Dad love her so much, she can come live with you. Caroline let out another dramatic wail, burying her face deeper into Richard's chest. I cannot go back to the suburbs, Dad. My whole life is downtown. Please do not let her do this to me. Richard patted Caroline's hair, his chest puffing out with that familiar, misplaced pride. He looked at me with absolute contempt, refusing to accept that I held any actual power over their lives. Fine. Richard scoffed, his voice dripping with arrogance. We will take her to our house. We do not need your cheap apartment anyway. You think you are so smart with your little real estate tricks, Amanda. You think you have won because you kicked your sister out on the street. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh, looking around the lobby, as if expecting the police and the concierge to join in his amusement. You are going to look incredibly foolish by next month, Richard boasted, puffing his chest out even further. Brad is a visionary. We just invested $200,000 into his new tech startup. When those investments pay out, Caroline is going to be able to buy this entire building from you and fire every single person standing here. We are going to be wealthy beyond your wildest jealous dreams. We do not need you, Amanda. We never did. I stood in the center of the lobby, listening to the man who was supposed to protect me actively brag about funding a known con artist. He was so blinded by his need to elevate Caroline that he had gleefully mortgaged his entire future just to prove a point. He thought he had the ultimate trump card. He thought he was untouchable. I looked at my father, feeling no anger, no sadness, and no pity. I just felt an overwhelming sense of finality. I popped the golden latches on my sleek leather briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. I walked forward, stopping just inches away from my parents and the sister who had ruined their lives. I held the envelope out toward my father. About your house, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a dead quiet whisper that cut through the lobby like a blade. You might want to read this. Richard snatched the manila envelope from my outstretched hand with a scoff, his movements sharp and aggressive. He tore at the heavy paper flap, clearly expecting to find some trivial legal threat or a fake invoice. He pulled out the thick stack of documents, his eyes darting to the bold black header printed across the very first page. I watched the exact second the air left my father's lungs. The smug, arrogant flush that had colored his face just moments ago vanished entirely, replaced by a sickly, translucent pale. His hands began to tremble so violently that the heavy legal paper rattled in his grip. His eyes scanned the first paragraph, then jumped to the property address listed in the center of the page. It was the address of the sprawling suburban home I had grown up in, the house my parents had proudly owned for over 30 years. Richard, what is it? Patricia demanded, her voice shrill as she noticed his sudden physical collapse. What did she give you? My father could not speak. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He just stared at the state seal stamped at the bottom of the page. Patricia grabbed the document from his trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the bold lettering at the top. Notice of default and foreclosure. This is a joke! Patricia gasped, her head snapping up to glare at me. This is some kind of sick, elaborate forgery. We are not in foreclosure. We just secured a massive home equity line of credit last month. The bank approved it based on our excellent financial history. I took a slow, measured step forward, looking directly into my mother's panicked eyes. It is not a forgery, Mom. It is a legally binding notice executed by the county clerk this afternoon. I kept my voice dead level, delivering the financial reality with the clinical precision of a corporate executive neutralizing a threat. When you remortgaged the family house to give Brad $200,000 in cash, you overleveraged your entire portfolio. You liquidated your primary savings to cover the initial closing costs, which meant you instantly defaulted on the secondary business loans Dad took out last year. You are currently 60 days delinquent on your primary debt obligations. Richard finally found his voice, though it sounded weak and breathless. The bank was supposed to give us a grace period. I spoke to the loan officer. He said they would not initiate foreclosure proceedings for at least 90 days. They would not have, I agreed calmly. But commercial banks love selling off high-risk delinquent debt to private equity firms to clear their ledgers before the end of the fiscal quarter. My company, Horizon Real Estate LLC, specializes in purchasing distressed suburban debt. I have a standing alert with my brokers for any properties filed under our family name. I purchased your mortgage from the bank for pennies on the dollar yesterday morning. I own your debt now, Dad. I hold the deed to your house. The silence in the grand lobby was absolute. Even the security guard standing behind me looked stunned by the sheer devastating scale of the financial checkmate. This is illegal, Patricia shrieked, clutching the foreclosure notice to her chest, as if trying to protect it. You cannot just buy your own parents' debt and throw them out on the street. We will take you to court. We will use the returns from Brad's startup to sue you for everything you have. I let out a soft, pitying laugh. You still do not get it, do you? I turned my gaze to Caroline, who was standing completely frozen next to her garbage bag of belongings. She had not spoken a single word since my parents arrived. She just stared at the marble floor, her face a mask of absolute horror. Tell them, Caroline, I commanded, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. Tell Mom and Dad about the visionary tech genius they just handed their life savings to. Patricia and Richard turned to their golden child, expecting her to immediately defend her boyfriend and reassure them that their investment was safe. Caroline did not look up. She just shook her head slowly, tears of humiliation spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. Caroline, what is she talking about? Richard demanded, stepping toward his favorite daughter. Call Brad right now. Tell him to wire us the initial dividend payout so we can crush your sister in court. Hi is gone, Dad. Caroline choked out, her voice cracking into a pathetic, broken sob. What do you mean he is gone? Patricia asked, her own panic now mirroring Caroline's. He was just with you. I did not let Caroline stumble through her confession. I delivered the final crushing blow myself. Brad does not have a tech startup, Dad. I looked my father dead in the eye, watching his entire world crumble. He is a professional con artist. The company you invested in is a shell corporation registered to a virtual mailbox in Delaware. He has no product, no staff, and no intellectual property. He targets wealthy older couples by dating their vulnerable, desperate daughters. Richard stumbled backward, bumping into the concierge desk to keep himself from falling. No, he whispered, shaking his head in rapid denial. No, I saw the business plan. I saw the financial projections. You saw a downloaded template, I corrected coldly. He took your $200,000, transferred it to an offshore account, and just dumped your precious daughter in the elevator upstairs because he realized you are completely tapped out. He is currently under federal investigation for running a massive Ponzi scheme, and your money is gone forever. The realization hit Patricia like a physical blow. Her knees buckled and she sank onto the expensive leather luggage she had dropped on the floor just minutes ago. She looked up at me, her face pale, her arrogant facade entirely stripped away. She realized in real time that she and my father were completely broke, effectively homeless, and the daughter they had just verbally abused in a public lobby was their sole creditor. "Amanda, please!" Patricia begged, her voice trembling as the arrogance vanished, replaced by sheer suffocating terror. "You cannot do this. We are your parents. We raised you. We provided for you. You cannot throw us out of our own home. We have nowhere else to go." I looked down at the woman who had told me to consider babysitting my rent for existing in her family. I looked at the woman who had relentlessly funded Caroline's abuse of a good, devoted father. "You raised me to be a silent, emotionless ATM mom," I replied, my voice stripped of any remaining sympathy. "You treated me like a bank my entire life. Well, congratulations. I am the bank now, and the bank is foreclosing." Richard covered his face with his hands, letting out a ragged, defeated groan. The golden child illusion had cost him everything he had ever worked for. He had bet his entire existence on Caroline's superiority, and he had lost spectacularly. Just as Patricia opened her mouth to beg again, a bright flashing light reflected off the glass revolving doors of the lobby. Everyone turned to look. A marked police cruiser had just pulled up silently right behind my parents' idling Uber SUV. The red and blue lights illuminated the dark city street, casting long, frantic shadows across the marble floor of the lobby. The heavy glass doors spun open. Two uniformed police officers stepped inside, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. They did not look at the concierge. They did not look at me or my parents. Their eyes swept the room and locked directly onto Caroline. The heavy glass revolving doors of the lobby spun to a halt as two uniformed police officers stepped inside. The flashing red and blue lights from their cruiser outside painted the marble floor in frantic, sweeping colors. The officers did not pause to speak to the concierge. They did not glance at my parents or the luggage scattered across the floor. Their eyes swept the grand lobby and locked with laser precision directly onto Caroline. My sister froze, her hands gripping the cheap plastic trash bag so tightly her knuckles turned stark white. For a second, the sheer silence in the lobby was deafening. Even Patricia and Richard stopped their panicked breathing, turning to stare at the approaching officers. Caroline, the taller officer, spoke, his voice booming with unmistakable authority as he closed the distance between them. "Please step away from the other individuals and place your hands where I can see them." Caroline's eyes darted wildly around the room, the reality of her consequences finally breaching the walls of her delusion. She took a shaky step backward, bumping into my father. "Officers, there has been a terrible mistake," she stammered, her voice pitching up into a frantic, desperate whine. "I was just leaving. My sister is trying to illegally evict me. I am the victim here." The officer did not slow his pace. He unclipped the handcuffs from his heavy leather duty belt, the metallic clatter slicing through the tense air. "There is no mistake," he stated, completely unmoved by her tears. "We have an active, extraditable felony warrant for your arrest. The charges include felony child abandonment, child endangerment, and multiple counts of federal identity fraud." Patricia let out a blood-curdling shriek, lunging forward to place herself between the police officer and her golden child. "You cannot arrest her," Patricia screamed, slapping her hands against the officer's broad chest. "She is a mother. She just went through a horrific divorce. My daughter is not a criminal." The second officer stepped forward, instantly grabbing Patricia by the arm and forcibly moving her aside. "Ma'am, if you interfere with a lawful arrest, you will be joining her in the back of the cruiser. Step back immediately." Richard grabbed Patricia by the shoulders, pulling her away before she could do any more damage. He was hyperventilating, his eyes wide with absolute horror as he watched the officers close in on his favorite daughter. Caroline realized there was no escaping. The high-powered Manhattan lawyer my parents had drained their accounts to hire was nowhere to be found, completely useless against a federal warrant. The money was gone. Brad was gone. Her protective shield had been entirely obliterated. As the taller officer reached out to grab her arm, Caroline completely lost her mind. "Do not touch me!" Caroline shrieked, dropping her garbage bag of belongings and thrashing wildly. She kicked out her ruined designer shoes, scraping against the polished marble as she fought like a cornered animal. You cannot do this to me. Do you know who my parents are? Do you know who I am? The officers moved with practiced surgical precision. They spun her around, forcing her arms behind her back, despite her violent struggling. The sharp, heavy click of the steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the lobby, a sound that signaled the absolute end of Caroline's untouchable existence. Help me. Caroline wailed, her voice cracking into a raw, pathetic sob as the officers began marching her toward the revolving doors. Mom, Dad, do not let them take me. Patricia was sobbing hysterically, leaning against Richard as they watched their daughter being physically dragged out of the luxury high-rise. They stumbled after the officers, bursting through the glass doors and out onto the cold, busy downtown street. I picked up my briefcase and followed them outside, standing safely by the entrance to watch the final act of this spectacular downfall. The cool night air bit at my face. Pedestrians on the sidewalk had stopped to pull out their phones, recording the hysterical woman in the ruined designer clothes fighting against the police. Amanda Patricia suddenly gasped, spinning around on the pavement to face me. Her face was streaked with running mascara, her eyes wide with desperate, suffocating panic. She abandoned her pride entirely, rushing forward to grab the sleeve of my jacket. Amanda, please, Patricia begged, her voice hoarse and broken. You have to help us. You have millions of dollars. You own this building. You are the only one who can fix this. Call your lawyers. Pay her bail. Do whatever it takes to get her out of there. She will not survive in a jail cell. I looked down at my mother's hands clutching my jacket. I thought about the text message she had sent me at the airport, telling me I was just jealous because I could not get a man. I thought about how she had told me to consider babysitting my rent for existing in this family, while my sister abandoned her 6-year-old twins. I thought about Devin, a good father, who had been financially ruined and emotionally destroyed by the exact woman my mother was now begging me to save. I reached out and firmly pried my mother's fingers off my jacket. I stepped back, looking her dead in the eye with a chilling, absolute calm. I cannot help you, Mom, I said, my voice perfectly steady, carrying loud and clear over the noise of the city street. I told you I am just a single girl with a little work-from-home job. I do not have that kind of money. Patricia stared at me, the color draining completely from her face. She opened her mouth to argue, to scream, to demand obedience, but the words died in her throat. She finally realized that the weapon she had used to belittle me for my entire adult life had just become the exact reason I was going to let her daughter rot in a cell. Behind her, the officers forcefully shoved Caroline into the back of the police cruiser. Caroline slammed her head against the reinforced glass window, sobbing uncontrollably as the heavy door clicked shut, locking her inside the cramped metal cage. The police officers climbed into the front seats. The siren chirped once, a short, sharp blast that signaled their departure. Patricia let out a gut-wrenching wail, running a few steps down the sidewalk as the cruiser pulled away from the curb, its red and blue lights flashing against the dark buildings. She stood in the middle of the street, crying out for the golden child who could no longer hear her. I turned my gaze to my father. Richard had not chased after the police car. He had not yelled at the officers. He had barely moved at all. Richard was standing by the curb, his shoulders completely slumped, his expensive suit looking suddenly huge and ill-fitting on his deflated frame. He was staring blankly at the taillights of the police cruiser disappearing down the avenue. In his trembling, white-knuckled hands, he was still clutching the heavy manila envelope containing the notice of default and foreclosure. He sank slowly to his knees right there on the concrete sidewalk, the reality of his total, irreversible ruin crushing him under its weight. A week passed since the flashing lights of the police cruiser disappeared down the avenue, taking my sister away into the dark city night. For my parents, those 7 days were a rapid, brutal descent into a financial purgatory they had built entirely with their own hands. Caroline was sitting in a county jail cell, denied bail, by a judge who viewed her as a severe flight risk due to her recent international child abandonment charges. Even if the judge had set a bail amount, Patricia and Richard could not have posted it. The morning after, Caroline was arrested. Federal agents executed a raid on the virtual mailbox in Delaware, associated with Brad's fake startup company. The FBI officially launched a massive investigation into his elaborate Ponzi scheme. Because my parents had recently wired $200,000 directly into an account, now flagged for federal wire fraud. The government immediately froze all of their remaining financial assets pending the investigation. Patricia and Richard had absolutely no access to cash, no available credit, and no way to hire a criminal defense attorney for their golden child. The high-powered Manhattan lawyer they had previously retained for the family court hearing officially dropped Caroline as a client, the second his retainer invoices bounced. My parents were completely paralyzed living in a house that I now legally owned, waiting for the 30-day eviction clock to run out. I did not visit the county jail to gloat, though I suppose my parents would have loudly accused me of doing exactly that. I went because I needed absolute closure. I needed to look at the woman who had tormented me for 34 years and know with absolute certainty that she no longer held a single ounce of power over my life. The county detention center was a sterile, unforgiving fortress of poured concrete, heavy steel doors, and harsh fluorescent lighting. I sat in the austere visitation room holding the heavy plastic phone receiver to my ear as I watched Caroline be escorted into the booth across the thick smudge-covered security glass. The bright orange jumpsuit swallowed her frame, making her look small and entirely unremarkable. Her expensive hair extensions were tangled and lifeless. The deep, exhausted shadows under her eyes were no longer hidden by expensive designer concealer. She sat down heavily on the metal stool, picking up the receiver with trembling hands. For a long moment, she just stared at me. She was finally realizing that the quiet, remote-working sister she had mocked her entire life was now the only person standing between her and a lengthy prison sentence. "Amanda, please!" Caroline begged, her voice cracking as fresh, desperate tears spilled over her cheeks. "You have to get me out of this place. You have to pay my bail. It is horrible in here. The food is disgusting and the guards treat me like an animal. Brad lied to me. He manipulated me. I had absolutely no idea what he was doing with Mom and Dad's money. I am a victim here too. We are sisters, Amanda. You have to save me." I listened to her pathetic pleas, feeling completely unmoved by her tears. She was not crying because she felt remorse for what she had done to her family. She was crying because she was experiencing real, unavoidable consequences for the very first time in her pampered life. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue with her frantic excuses. I simply reached into my sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a high-quality 8x10 printed photograph. I held it flat against the thick security glass, making sure it was directly in her line of sight. It was the picture of Leo and Mia clutching their tiny superhero backpacks, sobbing next to the trash can in Terminal 4. Caroline flinched, visibly turning her eyes away from the devastating image of her terrified children. "Look at them," I commanded, my voice cold, steady, and unwavering. "You threw them away like garbage just to enjoy a first-class flight with a con artist. You weaponized the legal system against a good, loving father. You tried to ruin Devon's life and strip him of his children simply because of his skin color and your own vanity. You deliberately filed false police reports, knowing exactly how dangerous that could be for a black man. You drained his bank accounts, you stole from me, and you bankrupted our parents. I am their mother," Caroline sobbed, pressing her forehead against the glass. "I made a mistake. I was just stressed out." "You are an incubator who happened to give birth," I corrected her sharply. "Devon is their parent." I pulled the photograph away from the glass and placed it carefully back into my briefcase, snapping the golden latches shut. I am not saving you, Caroline. Nobody is saving you. Our parents are broke. Brad is on the run from the FBI, and I am the one holding the deed to the family house. You are exactly where you belong. Enjoy the jumpsuit." I hung the heavy plastic receiver back on the metal wall hook. Caroline slammed her hands against the security glass, screaming something frantic that I could no longer hear through the thick soundproofing. I turned my back on and walked out of the visitation room, my footsteps echoing steadily down the concrete corridor. I did not look back. For the first time in my life, I felt a profound, incredible weight lift off my shoulders. I was completely free. The morning of the final family court hearing arrived with a crisp, clear sunrise over the city. The air felt lighter, completely stripped of the toxic tension that had suffocated our family for decades. I met Devon on the broad stone steps outside the courthouse. He was wearing a sharp-tailored suit, looking more rested, vibrant, and confident than I had seen him in years. He held out his arm, and I linked mine securely through it. We walked through the heavy wooden doors together, ready to face the judge and finalize the permanent future of the children who had finally been saved from the golden child's shadow. We walked through the heavy wooden doors of the family court, the muffled echo of our footsteps grounding me in the reality of the moment. The courtroom was vast and intimidating, filled with polished mahogany benches and the solemn weight of the justice system. Devin and I took our seats at the petitioner table, flanked by Veronica Caldwell, who was already meticulously arranging her legal files with the quiet confidence of a predator about to strike. I glanced over my shoulder toward the gallery. Sitting in the very last row were Patricia and Richard. The mere span of a week had aged them a decade. The arrogance that usually radiated from my father was entirely gone. His posture was severely hunched, and his suit looked wrinkled and distinctly worn. My mother sat beside him, clutching a crumpled tissue in her shaking hands. She wore no designer jewelry, no expensive makeup, and her hair lacked its usual immaculate styling. They were no longer the untouchable elite of their suburban country club. They were just two broke, desperate enablers waiting to watch their empire officially collapse. The heavy side door adjacent to the judge's bench clicked open. A uniformed bailiff stepped into the room, tightly gripping the arm of the defendant. Caroline shuffled into the courtroom. The sight of the golden child was staggering. She was wearing a bright, stiff orange jumpsuit issued by the county detention center. Her wrists were secured in heavy steel handcuffs fastened to a chain wrapped around her waist. Her expensive hair extensions were gone, leaving her natural hair limp and messy. She looked pale, terrified, and entirely stripped of the glamorous illusion she had spent her life cultivating. She sat down heavily at the defense table. She turned her head slightly to look back at our parents, a desperate plea for reassurance in her hollow eyes. Patricia just looked down at her lap, unable to even meet her favorite daughter's gaze. Judge Thompson entered the courtroom, her black robe billowing behind her as she took her seat at the high bench. She did not waste a single second on pleasantries. She looked down at the extensive file before her, her expression carved from stone. I have reviewed the emergency orders, the financial documents, and the pending federal indictments currently filed against the respondent. Judge Thompson began, her voice projecting absolute authority across the silent room. In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case of such profound, calculated malice directed at a child's other parent, nor have I seen such a reckless disregard for the safety of minor children. Judge Thompson looked directly at Caroline, her eyes narrowing with intense judicial disgust. You abandoned your 6-year-old twins in a highly trafficked international airport terminal. You manipulated the family court system to isolate them from their father, and you committed egregious federal financial crimes to fund a vacation with a known fraudster. You took out a multi-million-dollar life insurance policy on your own family while planning an exit strategy. You do not possess the basic human capacity required to be a mother. Caroline let out a quiet, pathetic sob, bowing her head as the crushing weight of her actions finally caught up to her. Judge Thompson struck the sounding block with her wooden gavel, the sharp crack making Caroline flinch violently. I am hereby terminating all of your parental rights effective immediately. You are permanently stripped of any legal or physical custody of Leo and Mia. I am granting 100% sole irrevocable custody to Dr. Devin. Furthermore, the court orders you to pay full financial restitution for the high-yield loans you fraudulently acquired using his identity to repair the intentional damage you inflicted upon his credit. Devin let out a long, shuddering breath beside me. He closed his eyes, his hands resting flat on the wooden table as the oppressive nightmare he had been living for 6 months was legally and permanently erased. The system that Caroline had weaponized to destroy him as a black father had just vindicated him completely. Just as Veronica began to gather her legal binders into her briefcase, a frantic commotion broke out in the back of the courtroom. Patricia had jumped to her feet. She pushed past the heavy wooden swinging gate dividing the gallery from the courtroom floor, her face flushed with panic. "Your Honor, please," Patricia cried out, her voice cracking with desperation. "What about us? We are their grandparents. We love Leo and Mia. You cannot just cut us out of their lives completely. We have rights." The bailiff immediately stepped forward, placing a stern, unyielding hand on my mother's shoulder to halt her advance. Judge Thompson glared down from the bench, her eyes flashing with absolute contempt. "Ma'am, lower your voice and step back or I will hold you in contempt of court," the judge warned sharply. Patricia froze trembling as she clung to the wooden railing. Richard stood up in the back row looking terrified, but he did not make a move to retrieve his wife. Judge Thompson leaned forward, fixing her intense gaze on my mother. "You are asking this court for grandparent visitation rights. Let me be remarkably clear. I have read the transcripts of your previous testimonies in this very courtroom. You sat on that witness stand and actively lied under oath to help your daughter secure a fraudulent restraining order against a devoted father. You bankrolled the legal harassment of Dr. Devon. You enabled the woman who abandoned your grandchildren at an airport, and you demanded that your other daughter absorb the fallout to protect your vacation plans." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, to deploy her usual manipulation, but the judge cut her off completely. "You are not a safe harbor for these children," Judge Thompson stated coldly. "You are active participants in their trauma. I am categorically denying any formal visitation rights. Any future contact you have with Leo and Mia will be entirely at the sole discretion of their father. And if I were him, I would not let you within 100 miles of them. We are adjourned." The gavel cracked one final time. The bailiff hauled Caroline up by her chained arms and escorted her back through the side door to be transported directly to the county jail. She did not even look back at us. Devon, Veronica, and I gathered our things and walked out of the courtroom, stepping into the bright, bustling marble hallway of the courthouse. We had won everything. Devon finally had his children back safe and secure. The battle was over. But before we could even reach the elevators, rapid, heavy footsteps echoed behind us on the marble floor. Patricia lunged forward, bypassing Devon entirely. She reached out and grabbed my arm with a desperate, bruising grip, her fingernails digging into the fabric of my blazer. "Amanda, please," Patricia begged, tears streaming down her face as she looked at me with sheer, unadulterated terror. She completely dropped the act of the grieving grandmother. She did not mention Leo, Mia, or Caroline. Her entire focus snapped instantly to her own survival. "You cannot foreclose on our house. The 30-day eviction notice expires next week. Your father cannot find a job. Our bank accounts are completely frozen by the FBI, and we have absolutely nowhere to go." I looked down at my mother's hand gripping my blazer. Her fingers were digging into the fabric with a desperate, pathetic urgency. Patricia was trembling, her tear-streaked face looking up at me as if I were her savior, completely forgetting that just a week ago, she had demanded I hand over my own property to appease her favorite daughter. She was waiting for me to break to revert to the obedient, silent ATM she had raised me to be. I firmly grabbed her wrist and peeled her fingers off my arm one by one. I looked my mother dead in the eye, my voice devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "I already filed the paperwork. You have 30 days to vacate. Maybe you can share a cell with Caroline." Patricia gasped, stumbling backward as if I had physically struck her. She looked at Richard, who was still standing near the courtroom doors, completely paralyzed by the realization that their social and financial empire had officially been eradicated. I turned my back on them, linking my arm through Devon's, and we walked out of the courthouse and into the bright city sunlight. 3 months passed in a blur of swift, undeniable justice. Caroline never even made it to trial. Without my parents' money to fund a high-powered defense team, she was assigned an overworked public defender who took one look at the mountain of digital evidence, the forged loan documents, and the airport security footage, and immediately advised her to surrender. Facing a mountain of federal and state charges, Caroline took a plea deal. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in a state penitentiary for wire fraud, identity theft, and felony child endangerment. The woman who had demanded a child-free reset in the Caribbean was now living in a tiny concrete cell with a steel toilet and a cellmate. Her designer wardrobe was permanently replaced by an abrasive orange uniform. Her influencer facade was completely destroyed, leaving behind nothing but the stark reality of her own toxic choices. My parents' downfall was equally absolute. When the 30-day eviction notice expired, Patricia and Richard were formally escorted out of my childhood home by the county sheriff. Because the FBI had frozen their remaining accounts due to their involvement with Brad's fraudulent shell corporation. They walked away with nothing but a few suitcases of clothes. They were forced to move into a cramped, poorly lit one-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city, miles away from the wealthy suburbs and country clubs they used to dominate. To pay their rent and buy groceries, my parents, who had spent their entire lives looking down on working-class people, had to take entry-level retail jobs. Richard, a man who used to boast about his visionary investments, was now working the customer service desk at a local hardware store, wearing a bright green vest and a name tag. Patricia was hired as a cashier at a discount department store. The profound irony was not lost on me. My mother, who had so cruelly mocked my remote technology career, was now spending 8 hours a day standing on her feet, ringing up cheap merchandise for the very people she used to gossip about at her luncheons. She had to smile and bag items for women she used to play tennis with, swallowing her pride for minimum wage. With my parents legally evicted, my company took full possession of the suburban house. I drove out to the property one crisp morning to meet with my commercial contracting team. Walking through the front door felt like stepping into a museum of bad memories. The walls were still lined with photos of Caroline. Her old bedroom was still preserved like a shrine to the golden child. I stood in the entryway and gave the lead contractor a simple directive. Gut it. Tear it all down to the studs. Over the next 2 months, my LLC completely renovated the property. We ripped out the outdated fixtures, tore down the walls that held so much resentment, and transformed the house into a stunning, modern, open-concept home. We erased every single trace of the toxic environment where I had been treated like an invisible servant. When the renovation was complete, the house was unrecognizable. It was bright, welcoming, and full of positive energy. I put the property on the market, and because of the incredible redesign and the highly desirable school district, it triggered an immediate bidding war. Within a week, I sold the house for a massive cash profit. The buyers were a lovely, hard-working young couple who were expecting their second child. Handing the keys over to a family who would actually fill those rooms with equal unconditional love felt like the ultimate closure. A few days after the sale officially closed, I sat in the glass-walled office of my private wealth management firm. Beatrice, my portfolio manager, slid a detailed financial report across the polished desk. "The wire transfer from the house sale just cleared," Amanda Beatrice said with a professional smile. "The net profit is substantial. Where would you like me to allocate the funds? Do you want to roll it into another real estate acquisition or move it into your primary stock portfolio?" I looked at the massive number printed on the bottom line of the document. This was the money my parents had tried to use to fund a con artist. This was the equity they had weaponized to protect Caroline. I knew exactly where it needed to go. "I want to establish 2 separate high-yield college trust funds," I instructed, sliding the paper back to her. "One for Leo and one for Mia." Beatrice nodded, her fingers flying across her keyboard to begin the drafting process. "Excellent choice. We can set the maturation date for their 18th birthdays. Who will be listed as the legal custodian of the accounts until then?" "List Dr. Devon as the primary custodian," I said. "And Beatrice, I need you to draft the trust documents with the most aggressive, impenetrable legal ironclads your legal department can create. I want it structured so that under no circumstances can their biological mother Caroline ever access, borrow against, or even view the balances of these accounts. Even if she somehow manages to manipulate a judge in the future, I want this money completely locked away from her reach." Beatrice looked up, a sharp, understanding gleam in her eyes. "I will make the trusts bulletproof, Amanda. She will not be able to touch a single cent." I leaned back in my leather chair, a deep, resonant sense of peace settling into my chest. The money that had once been the source of my family's arrogance and cruelty was now permanently secured to guarantee the future of the 2 innocent children who had survived it. I had taken everything Caroline owned, and I had used it to build an unbreakable fortress for her children. 6 months after the trust funds were finalized, the sweltering heat of mid-July settled over the city. I was standing on the expansive cedar deck of my own home, holding a glass of iced tea and watching the water ripple in the deep end of my backyard pool. The air smelled of charcoal smoke, grilled vegetables, and sunscreen. Classic summer music drifted from the outdoor speakers, mingling with the absolute best sound in the entire world: the unrestrained, joyful laughter of 2 healthy 6-year-old children. Leo and Mia were splashing wildly in the shallow end, wearing brightly colored floaties and tossing a neon beach ball back and forth. Their faces were flushed with sunshine and pure, unadulterated happiness. Looking at them now, it was almost impossible to reconcile these vibrant, energetic kids with the terrified, shivering children I had found huddled next to a trash can in Terminal 4. There was no fear in their eyes anymore. No anxious glancing around, no terrified whispers about dark basements or angry mothers. The healing process had not been instantaneous. In the early days, Leo used to hoard snacks in his pockets, terrified that he would suddenly be left alone without food again. Mia used to wake up screaming from night terrors, crying out that she had been abandoned in a crowded room. But through intensive child therapy, unwavering consistency, and the absolute devotion of their father, those traumas slowly began to lose their grip. Today, they were just kids again, completely safe and entirely loved. Devin stood a few feet away at the massive stainless steel grill, expertly flipping burgers with a pair of silver tongs. He wore a faded college t-shirt and board shorts, looking completely relaxed. The deep, exhausted shadows that used to permanently ring his eyes during the custody battle were completely gone. He was no longer a man crushed by a racist, manipulative family court system. He was a thriving, respected pediatrician and a fully empowered father who had his entire world back exactly where it belonged. He had even recently expanded his medical practice, opening a new community clinic to serve underprivileged families, a project my real estate firm had proudly helped him secure the commercial lease for. Devin plated the food and walked over to the patio table where I was sitting. He set down a platter of burgers, wiped his hands on a towel, and reached into the cooler. He pulled out a sparkling water, twisted off the cap, and handed it to me. He did not go back to the grill right away. Instead, he leaned against the wooden railing next to my chair and looked out at the pool. We watched Mia execute a highly uncoordinated but deeply enthusiastic cannonball into the water, sending a massive splash across the deck. Leo cheered loudly, completely soaking his father's medical clinic baseball cap that he had insisted on wearing into the pool. Devin let out a soft, resonant laugh. He raised his bottle of water and tapped it gently against the glass in my hand. "Thank you," Devin said, his voice dropping to a quiet, profound register. I smiled, taking a sip of my drink. "For the barbecue. I barely lifted a finger today, Devin. You did all the cooking." He shook his head, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that held the weight of the entire past year. "You know what I mean, Amanda. Thank you for showing up at the airport that day. Thank you for standing between me and those police officers. Thank you for fighting for the truth when the entire system was rigged against me. Thank you for giving my children their childhood back. And thank you for giving me my life back." I looked at the man who had weathered absolute hell simply for the crime of loving his children. I looked at the twins who were currently arguing over who got to use the giant inflatable flamingo first. I thought about the sheer destructive chaos my parents and my sister had unleashed upon all of us, and how incredibly close they had come to getting away with it. "You do not have to thank me, Devin," I replied, my voice steady and completely sincere. "We are a team now. That is what actual family does." I turned my gaze back to the water, feeling the warm summer breeze brush past my face. The toxic roots of my biological family had been permanently severed. Patricia and Richard were still working their minimum wage retail shifts, suffocating under the weight of their own arrogance and the massive debts they had incurred to fund a con artist. Caroline was still sitting in a concrete cell serving out her 5-year sentence, completely stripped of the unearned luxury she had valued more than her own flesh and blood. They had built their entire lives on a foundation of lies, cruelty, and manipulation. And when that foundation finally crumbled, they were left with absolutely nothing. But from the ashes of that destruction, something incredibly beautiful had bloomed. My career as a technology executive continued to soar, and my real estate investments grew stronger every quarter. But my greatest achievement was not financial. It was the peace I had secured for the people sitting in my backyard. I learned the hardest, most valuable lesson of my life over the past year. Family is not defined by biology. Family is not determined by a shared last name or a legal birth certificate. True family is about who shows up at the airport when you are crying. It is about who protects you when you are terrified and vulnerable. It is about who stands by your side and fights for you when the rest of the world turns completely cold. My family tried to use me as a mindless, invisible servant. They underestimated my intelligence, they mocked my career, and they tried to bleed me dry. But by doing so, they inadvertently gave me the tools, the fire, and the financial power to eradicate them completely and build a chosen family that was based on actual unconditional love. I raised my glass toward the pool, silently toasting to the brilliant, unbreakable future that lay ahead of us. The nightmare was over and the rest of our lives was just beginning. If you have ever been treated like an outsider by the people who were supposed to protect you, or if you have ever had to build your own family from the ground up, I want to hear your story. Let me know how you found your strength in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming toxic environments and reclaiming your power. Remember, your worth is never determined by those who are too blind to see it. You have the power to write your own ending. Thank you so much for listening. The most profound lesson I learned from this entire ordeal is that sharing DNA with someone does not obligate you to endure their abuse. For my entire adult life, I was conditioned to believe that familial loyalty meant silently absorbing financial theft, emotional manipulation, and blatant disrespect. I was taught that keeping the peace was always more important than protecting my own well-being. But standing in that international airport terminal, looking at two terrified, abandoned children, absolute clarity finally washed over me. I realized that true family is defined entirely by consistent actions, not mere biology. When toxic people show you exactly who they are, you must believe them the very first time. My parents and my sister built their existence on an illusion of superiority, expecting me to act as an invisible foundation to support their selfish choices. They weaponized the concept of family to demand endless sacrifices while offering absolutely nothing but contempt in return. I learned that setting ironclad, uncompromising boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but an act of profound self-preservation. Severing ties with the individuals who constantly tear you down creates the essential space needed to build a life surrounded by genuine, unconditional love. Devin, Leo, and Mia became my true family because we actively chose to protect and uplift one another when the world turned cold. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace? Let me know your story in the comments below.